Good afternoon and welcome back to the October 1st, 2019 Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting. I hope everybody had a good lunch. We are on item number 3. We have completed public comment. We will ask Mr. Alt if there's anything he wants to add up to public comment, and we will ask questions and move forward as a board. Mr. Alt.
Welcome back from lunch. A couple of key points came up in the discussion I'd like to touch on. So I probably should have prefaced the beginning of the presentation with the purpose of a fee study and the notion of Prop 26. We are only allowed to identify fees that are directly related to the ordinance itself. So what's in the fee study and what you can see up here on the screen is intended directly to implement 17.95 if the board puts that ordinance in place. There's not fees in here or any additional monies or taxes to support illegal growth. This is specifically to administer the permit program, to issue the permits, to do inspections, plot map inspections, issue the permits themselves, and then enforcement only on the regulatory program. In no way is the Sheriff's Department excluded at all from their enforcement of illegal growth. So where we reference in the job duties enforcement, it would be enforcement of the provisions of a cannabis cultivation permit, and if the office is doing the background permits, enforcement of those permits as well. The program office itself, I wanted to make clear that the program office itself would consist, as recommended, would consist of, I call it here a CAO manager, program manager. We haven't settled on a name, but this would be the person with oversight of the Cannabis Control Office. There's also a fiscal person and an admin person that would handle all of the duties that were put forward in the staff report of the office. And that's coordinating with growers and employees, issuing the background permits, coordinating the review of a cultivation permit. These positions are new positions, but all of the rest that you see here below the highlighted area are existing responsibilities. For example, code compliance, planning, environmental health specialist, county ag commissioner. These are all roles that would be involved in the issuance of permits and the administration of the permits only for 17.95 and cultivation under that regulation. These are not all positions that would be housed in the cannabis office. They're already housed in other departments. Some, to the question, they may be new people. In some cases, some of these may be new positions to scale up for the review of the permits, but these are not all positions that would exist in the Cannabis Control Office. There are positions in particular departments that would be responsible for reviewing proposed permits. So, for example, I know Peter's here. I don't want to speak for his department, but in his case, in planning, where they do the paper review and examine the setbacks and all the other provisions in 17.95, that would be done in the planning department with these staff, not in the Cannabis Control Office. The Cannabis Control Office would simply coordinate the logistics of that review, along with all of the other positions but below those and their involvement in the permit process that are below those 3 mentioned in the program office. I want to make a very specific distinction between the regulatory program and reiterate this. And the regulatory program, if the board approves 17.95, that's the regulatory ordinance. This office, these positions would only have responsibility for maintaining 17.95. Anything else on the illicit side would still obviously be the Sheriff's Department, but I think I created some confusion in the discussion and the presentation that somehow this office would take over the enforcement activities that the Sheriff's Office already does. That's not our intention. We don't want to do that. We believe in Sheriff Rick and the work that they do, and wholeheartedly want that work to stay in their office. This fee study is the first view of the board getting to see an administrative draft. It's not in a finalized form. Part of the purpose of this presentation here today is to hear the feedback and the discussion about how we may improve it, what the board needs to see as we bring it back in further iterations. And so really this is just the first piece, the first effort that you're looking at here. And then one last piece, I heard some comments that the sheriff's office also wouldn't be involved in their permitting, and that we would need sheriff's deputies to be involved in the site inspections when we go out and verify what's in the paper permit is exactly what exists on the site. We do have staffing for that very purpose to be involved in the site inspections. We haven't excluded the sheriff's department. They were involved. In fact, Rick's been at every meeting that we've had in the department heads and the work group to have involvement and input in this. And there's no effort whatsoever to exclude the SO from being involved in at least having eyes on the site that has a proposed permit so that they can verify the things that are in the regulation that are relative to their subject matter expertise. They would, at least in this proposed study, they would be involved to examine those things when we do a site inspection. I think I covered for the most part the key points that I picked up in the discussion.
Thank you. Further questions from the board? Supervisor Mills.
Yes, I know that the sheriff has not had a chance to make any statements or weigh in on this, and I would certainly appreciate the opportunity for him to give his opinion, because we are going to need the cooperation and coordination of all of the various agencies or departments that are going to be tasked with working this. So,
and I appreciate that you mentioned that. I don't mean to cut our sheriff off, but of all the engagement that I've had from colleague department heads, Rick, our sheriff, has been involved in every one of the discussions, and I think I'll speak for myself right now, but we have a lot of interaction, probably more than I've had with any of the other department heads, to make sure what we do aligns with the work that he needs done in a regulatory program, and that we don't extend into causing him any difficulties in the enforcement side of things. And I appreciate the input that he's had, and he certainly could speak for himself, but we've worked very closely on this, and you'll see the same in 9.22.
Speak, Sheriff.
Good afternoon, Board. We did speak quite a bit. I have been at all the meetings with Al to resolve some of the issues. I apologize for not being here at last week's 9.22 meeting, or 2 weeks ago. We had a family issue I had to deal with. And I was very specific when I talked to Captain Macedo, or Under Sheriff Macedo. See, I still make that mistake too. In regards to, if you folks did not want the 922 to be implemented as myself and my staff and the DA wanted, that we were going to back away from it and let the CAO's office have it, or you folks decide what you want to do with it. You asked for my recommendations. I gave you my recommendations, and if you want to change that, you made it a very solid point that you guys put the laws in place and we enforce the laws. So that's the way we stand on that. One point I want to make sure that you're clear, that because I watched pretty much the whole thing on my phone. The one thing that I don't think was relayed to staff was that the sheriff's office is not doing the backgrounds. I think there was, from what I saw at the very end of that meeting the other day, that there was still the perception that the sheriff's office was doing the backgrounds, and we are not at this point. To me, it was pretty clear. Mr. Garamendi made that very clear, but I don't think everybody understood that.
Right, and we're going to take up 9.22 as a final item on the agenda today.
Right. So I just want to be clear. So I'm here to answer any questions y'all might have.
well, that's basically why I asked you to stand there for a moment, but how is your office going to be able to assist us in fully controlling the final result? If the intent is to get this level of regulation in place, there are very few cities and counties that are going in this direction of having any kind of a cannabis control office. Very few. So I'm just trying to understand how you would fit into this process and whether you feel that there might be some alternatives.
Well, as CAO all talked, we are on the table to work with code compliance and planning and whoever else we need to go out to the field and to do our part in making sure that their perimeter fences are up, their security cameras are up, and whatever falls under the realm of the sheriff's office's view as important to us to make sure that those regulatory sites are where they need to be in that capacity. I think that, and Mr. Ault made a good point, that this issue is so controversial that a lot of people don't understand that there is a big difference between regulatory and illicit. And my office at this point in time, even, and I will go back, even during the urgency ordinance, 98% of what the sheriff's office did was illicit. We didn't have the personnel nor the time to deal with the regulatory side, and code compliance did that most of the time to the best of their abilities. We were there to help them, and if you remember, the county had a contract with CHP to go out and do standbys with them, with code compliance, to deal with the registered growers to make sure that everything was in order, because the sheriff's office didn't have the time and the ability to do that because we were dealing with illegal grows. So I just want to make sure that everybody's very clear. We will, no matter what happens here today or tomorrow when this comes around, we will not, until you folks tell me don't go after any illegal grows anymore, we will continue to do that to the best of our abilities.
So you remember when we were in the meeting with Tabitha, she was very clear, and I know our code enforcement team also was very clear. There was a lot of hand-holding, a lot of educational processing going on during the urgency ordinance. And Tabitha was very clear that we got to stop doing that. You know, they either get it or they don't. Tabitha is with the Bureau of Cannabis Control.
Yeah, she's with CDFA, the California Division of Food and Agriculture, who oversees one portion of cannabis.
Right. So I guess the point is that with what she was telling us about go slow, take our time, but don't be babysitting. She used that term, babysitting.
Yeah.
Are we going to really be able to accomplish that? Based upon the idea of a cannabis czar, are we going to be able to accomplish it?
Well, in the conversations that I have had with Tabitha at that meeting up at Ironstone and the 3 or 4 times I've met with her after that, she recommends that we have something to this effect. And you had mentioned this a couple of years ago, I think, about having, I don't want to call it a one-stop shop, but someplace that everybody knows that they have a person in charge of cannabis. And what I took from our conversations was that you need to go slow, and you need to start small, and you need to make sure that you are charging for everything you do so that you're not pulling any funds out of the general fund so that the taxpayers aren't paying for that and is being paid for by the growers. So that was my take from what she said. And again, it was all in how many we started with. And again, I will go back to, that was a comment that we've had in the past, start with 25. And I understand that there's concern about that, but it wasn't that, you're only going to have 25 and then 2 years down the road you're going to get another 25. It's especially when it came to the backgrounds and doing the registrations for the owners of the properties. You start with 25, and as we get them done, then you bring the next one in. So you always have 25 going. Don't slam us with 200, because there is no department, you're not going to be able to stand up, this is my opinion now, you are not going to be able to stand up a department anywhere that is going to be able to handle that. And there was talk of hiring part-time people. You're not going to find part-time people and get them trained in a timely fashion to put this together. It's not going to happen. We have to be realistic about this. And Jack and I have talked about this, and we've talked about starting slow. Our opinion, and when I say our, I will talk myself, and I think Peter was in the meetings, Barbara Yook was in the meetings. Start small, and let's work our way up. You know, if you have to pull a rabbit out of a hat, I said, I'll bring my cowboy hat in, you pick names out of the cowboy hat, if you're going to start that way. But is it doable? Yes. It is doable in what Al has put together. I think it is doable as long as it is started the right way.
If anyone would like a copy of Title 2.8 dated from 2017, when that discussion went on, it's in my tote right underneath my desk here. So certainly welcome to see it. Do you see any glitches?
The glitch that I have is the backgrounds. I think the sheriff's office should be doing the backgrounds.
Okay, but that would be a separate conversation,
Yeah.
what we're talking about here. To some degree.
As far as this, no. I think that Al's done a fantastic job. He has everybody in place that, and again, we all sat around the table and talked numerous times. I think that everybody that needs to be in there is there, including law enforcement.
Okay, I appreciate your candor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Supervisor Stopper?
Thank you very much, Sheriff de Basilio. You brought up a very good point. Most of your work goes into illicit and very, very little into regulatory. Typically, you would not be involved into a regulatory scheme, except for in this industry, there's quite a few people that have been crossing over from illicit to regulatory, and you've been there for such things as safety for other employees, correct?
Yeah, and it goes the other way around. We have a lot of people that were registered growers that are now on the illicit side too.
Very much so, and that'll come up during 17.95 when you brought a very hefty list with you, and I appreciate that you brought that with you because I asked for it and it's pertinent to the conversation. Illicit being people that are not complying with the law that's set before them.
Right now, that's everybody
Right,
because there's a ban.
and you're enforcing the law. I just wanted that defined outright. I do appreciate the work you do for us and everything else, and I do appreciate that you have worked with the CAO on what the needs would be for the Sheriff's Department if we were to move forward in this fashion. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Thank you. Is there any further questions from the board? Supervisor Toffenali?
Yes, Sheriff. Looking at the 3 sheriff's office employees that he has there, are any of those that you know of or asking for new employees?
Negative.
No.
Those are current positions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, before us, we have 2 items which we could do with a single motion, which is to authorize the creation of a Division of Cannabis Control and direct the finalization of the study, direct Mr. Alt to complete the study fee to be brought back, assuming on October 15th. So is there further discussion amongst the board members, or is there a motion?
Just quickly a thought, Chair.
Sure.
It has to do with compliance with wage and hour, which seems to always be kind of a loose area, and compliance with OSHA. Is there anything we're going to be able to plug into your office that's going to ensure that those requirements are met, or that we are in some kind of oversight of those requirements?
Of the employers?
Wage and hour as
Of
well?
our employees or?
No, theirs.
Hadn't contemplated that. We're not doing that with other businesses per se. We haven't factored that into this.
Because other counties are. So I just wanted to find out if that was something that we might want to contemplate, maybe not right now, but somewhere in the future. Thank you.
Further questions or a motion?
I have a question.
Supervisor Toffenali?
What is the proposal for startup fees or startup money? You can't just put all this together. You have, at least in the CAO, you said 3 new employees there. So are we going to start collecting permit fees and then put this together using that money? Or is there seed money that we're going to be using from somewhere that's not in the budget right now? Because we just adopted the budget that did not have this department in it. How are we going to implement this? Where are we going to get the money from to start it?
Well, that's a good question. We don't have that as of yet. Right now in 17.95, the whether or not we collect fees is going to be contemplated in the ordinance. So a couple of different ways it can be done. For one, like we do with many other budgets, we populate the budgets with revenue calculations. We did that with almost all of the budgets in the budget that we just adopted. All of those revenues are projected revenues. There's not one budget that you can look at in the budget we just adopted that doesn't have projected revenues in it. So that's one way to do it. Another is to start with, for lack of a better term, skeleton crew that are from existing operations to get the program started, and then as we start collecting the revenue, then we can staff up with the revenue. That's certainly a way we can do it. But in so doing, there's also going to be other responsibilities. It's not as if staff from all of these areas are sitting around waiting for 17.95 to come in place. They're fully burdened. So some of the other work that's going on in these assignments would have to be shuffled. But that's a way we could do it as well, as start it basically on a skeleton crew and scale it up as we start getting the permit fees.
The other question I have then is, being a new department and being under the CAO, there would have to be a new line items created in your budget to oversee the funds coming in and going out and being spent. So when we visit this, when you come back, apparently you're going to come back, or if you take all these suggestions, we'll have to deal with that, creating new line items under your budget, displaying the new departments, and we're going to have a new control list for the CAO created, and Judy coming to us with those employees. And you plan on doing that when you bring this back?
Depending on the board's direction, that would be what I anticipate. There has been for several years a cannabis budget, for lack of a better term. There is a budget. It was in this budget, in fact, and it has been. There's no money in it, but there's a budget string, for lack of a better word, already created that was used previously. Again, there's no revenue in it. You didn't adopt that in any other way other than that existing marijuana budget is what it's called. So we could use the existing budget string, bring back a proposal either with revenue projections and or position and staffing along with the fee study. And that frankly would need to include at least one job description, because there's not an existing job as CAO manager or cannabis control manager, so the board would have to adopt that as well, so that would have to come back. The others are existing job titles within. We already have the job titles. We bring them back in the position control list, as you've mentioned.
Okay, I saw in the preliminary budget that page under the CAO with no money in it. You're correct, but when final budget came, in the preliminary there was no MCCR, which had to do with the regulatory program before and the refunds. But when the final budget came, that page was missing in my book. I don't know about, I can't speak for everybody else, but that page was missing. It was mysteriously gone from preliminary to final budget, and then an MCCR page was put in there. So I'm not sure what we passed had that in it that you're speaking of, because I specifically looked for it when I went through your budget, and it wasn't there.
I could be mistaken. I believe it was in final. There was no money in it. It was simply the budget string that was there from previous years. If it's not in final, it's still the same budget string that we would use to populate and come back. It didn't have any money in it anyways. We'd have to bring it back with revenue projections, specific allocations consistent with the fee study on personnel, equipment, and some other things that are in the fee study, like we do with the other budgets.
Supervisor Stopper?
Well, he already addressed some of it. The MCCR line was the item. It was always the permitting funds that are restricted under Prop 26 to facilitate registration. And I've been familiar with that one for quite a few years. I have a question for my fellow supervisor on OSHA compliance and wage scale. What county does that? Because I would be very interested to see evidence on that.
Sonoma County.
Sonoma County has a wage scale and OSHA compliance for a cannabis worker regulatory system?
That's correct.
All right, I'll double check that.
I think what Supervisor Toffenali was referring to was these 2 pages, which were copied directly from the recommended and the final budget, the preliminary and the final. And we see a 56,000 MCCR fund in final. It was a new fund that was established with 572,746 as a bottom line net cost on it, with no revenue stated. So if anybody'd like to see it for reference, they're certainly welcome to have it.
I can't see it from here, but.
Yeah.
Other,
It's the MCCR one saying that there's no money in it?
There's money in it right there. It's the net cost.
Okay, so that was in the final budget also.
This was in the September final.
Okay, cheers.
let's bring it back.
Okay,
Is there a motion?
yeah, I'll make the motion assuming 1795 is approved, because this is all hinged on 1795, that we authorize the creation of the Division of Cannabis Control. And I need to explain my position on why. I mean, ever since I've been back on the board, I've been listening to the drama that's been involved all over the county regarding this, and there was never a central focus of where people went, no matter where they were on this issue. And I think solidifying it under one umbrella is fine. If we had wanted to do it under another department, it would have been fine with me. It just needs to be under one location, someone who is orchestrating this from all the permutations that are involved in this subject. The second is the finances. We seem to have, for whatever, kind of lost control. Well, and I've heard my colleagues talk about it. Well, how much is it costing much? How much did the program cost us? How much did we spend? Well, now we're going to have a mechanism to track the fiscal impact of the ordinance if this happens. So that's the second reason. The third, and I disagree with the sheriff, that I think we're going to be doing live scan on everybody that comes in. We had accepted the sheriff and the district's attorney's criteria. So when live scan comes in, we know if somebody, be it a worker or an owner, meets the criteria that the sheriff and the DA wanted. So if there's a question or it's something that might walk a fine line, then there's no reason that person under this work unit couldn't talk to the sheriff or to the district attorney. For the most part, it'll be fairly straightforward, especially regarding the owners, the cultivators. They've already been through this process. They went through it when they were approved for the county permit last time. They went through it when they got their temporary permit from the state. So this is just something they're already familiar with. They're going through it again. So these are the reasons that I support the creation of the Division of Cannabis Control, the Department of whatever it is under the CAO's office. I'm not going to talk about the fee study because I have another question on that. So I have a motion.
Is there a motion before us? Is there a second?
I have a question.
Sir, we are not doing public comment now.
You brought
Sir?
you brought this
Sir?
gentleman with more information.
Sir, you may return to your seat.
We're supposed to be able to
Sir,
question his new information.
We are on break now.
You told me
Sir?
this morning that you'd give me an answer to
Sir?
my questions. You haven't done that.
Sir, you can sit down or you can leave the room. We have a motion. Is there a second?
With the fact that multiple board members, whether they have supported something like this or not supported something like this in the past, have always asked questions about the financial oversight and tracking. I am of the firm belief that if the board does approve something like this and the ordinance in the future, that this will be the vessel in which a lot of that tracking can happen through. And it was something that was never put forth prior, that there was a firm need of. And talking to staff across the county for the last couple of years, a majority of them have supported this type of vessel so that they could have proper direction and organization. So with that, I'll second it.
Very well. We have a motion to approve and a second. I'll call the vote. Supervisor Toffenali?
Yeah, well, since we've had two supervisors that say the reasons why they're going to support it, I'm going to give the reasons why I'm not going to support it. And at this time, and I appreciate, Al, all of what you've done here and what you've put together and the effort that you put into it, especially in what we have here. But to me, there's still a lot of unknowns that we need to solidify before we create this. We have all of this here in front of us, and we have extra hires, and we don't know if we have how many people we're going to actually hire that are new to positions that we put in. We went through this with the urgency ordinance, and the extra hires that were only supposed to be through the period of the permitting process ended up becoming permanent employees. So we still have those employees here that we've been carrying over the course of the last few years without any ordinance at all regarding regulation of this industry. From what I'm looking at here and not even being able to answer the questions that I asked, shows that we're headed down, in my opinion, somewhat down that same urgency ordinance pathway. Maybe a little bit more organized, but not quite as the necessity for me to feel comfortable doing this at this time. I did not, when this was brought up before, I did not support it. And I understand what Supervisor Stopper is saying, because I've heard it all along also from department heads, most of them saying they don't want anything to do with it. It's glad it's not going to be in their backyard, but yet when we look at this that we're looking at here that you put together, their departments are still all involved of it. You have not just a department that's dedicated solely to the cannabis industry, but you've engulfed all the other departments involved in it too. So if this one department is in charge, then what about the department heads that you're using from code and planning and environmental? What do those department heads have to say when somebody's given directed to go do something by this czar that's in your office? To me, it's not clear. It's not defined the way a certain department is. What other departments do we have that we've created that has utilized, can and will be utilizing all these other departments from the sheriff on up, and I without dedicated employees. I'm not saying that these aren't needed. I'm saying they need to be dedicated employees if you're going to go down that path. So to me, it's not really clear on what we're doing. We're still going to come back and redo some of this and keep coming back to redo some of this. I may be able to, after we get past 17.95, and we come back with some of the things that you said you're going to do, and it's more organized, I may be able to support it at that time, but this time I just can't. It just doesn't seem to be organized enough for me to buy into it this time. So,
Supervisor Mills, would you like to make a comment before you
Yes.
vote?
Again, I'm also in that same mode. When Supervisor Toffenali was talking about budget, I had already had that in my file and had been spending some time with it, is how is it going to be in the budget, and in what machination would that occur? I am definitely considering the majority of those cities and counties in California that regulate are not using a central office. It leads me to wonder why we have this ultimate desire to build a new bureaucracy. And, we can build ivory towers all day long, but whether or not they're of any value is the next question. So although I also appreciate Mr. Alt's forethought and the amount of effort that you put into this, I've also got to be thinking about, for the benefit of how much, when we have 44,000 plus other individuals in Calaveras County, do we spend the same amount of time with them and their needs as we're doing on this? Absolutely not. So I'm just really concerned that, we're putting the cart in front of the horse here, as somebody had said. And that is, I think, a critical statement is that if we're not going to be able to get a good ordinance together, it's just going to lead to additional misery for whoever is in charge of this program. Next, coming from my background, I don't see enough check and balance here. And check and balance means that we could build it for the most ethical and honest and upright individual to run it as possible. But likewise, what checks have we put in place to ensure that should that individual go horribly south, that we are able to contain or control the damage? So having a sworn officer doing background checks, that's quite one thing. But having somebody who's just hired to do background checks, and I know I'm speaking a little bit to 922, is quite another. And so there's an accountability issue here that I think that really needs to be seriously discussed and vetted to ensure that whoever is going to be in charge of this is truly accountable to this board or a future board, and that we ensure that that individual is maintaining the highest standards. I'm going to relay a story very quickly because of my time in Chicago. I did not get my dumpsters from the local scavenging authority. I paid cash to an envelope to a ward alderman to get it done. So I just want to be sure that we don't end up in that kind of situation when we're making this kind of decision. And for that reason, I won't support it at this time.
Very well. We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
no.
Ayes, Stopper, Callaway, Garamendi, Noes, Mills, Toffenelli. Very well. We'll move on to, we'll take, do you guys need to reshuffle? All right, let's take 2 minutes and reorganize. We are moving on to item number 4. Supervisor Mills has informed me that statute of limitations in Illinois is expired for that. Mr. Mauer, excuse me, Madam Clerk.
Item 4 is from the Planning Department to conduct a public hearing and accept the addendum to the Environmental Impact Report for the Medical Cannabis Cultivation and Commerce Ordinance Project, make appropriate findings, adopt an ordinance amendment rescinding Chapter 17.95 of the County Code and replacing it with a new Chapter 17.95 regulating commercial and non-commercial cannabis cultivation, and direct staff to publish a summary of the ordinance.
Thank you. Let me start off for how I want to do this today. Obviously, you'll do your presentation. We will ask questions. Then what we'll do is we're going to have public comment. I would ask everybody to focus it on 7.95. We'll then have a discussion amongst the board, make edits, go through the whole process. At the conclusion of our discussion on 17.95, we will have another public comment section where people can talk about the technical changes that may have been made. Public comment will be combined both 17.95 as well as any EIR issues. So this is all-encompassing under this section. So with that, we will move forward. Mr. Mauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Peter Maurer, Planning Director. As indicated by the board clerk, this is a proposed ordinance replacing 1795 with a new regulatory ordinance. The draft ordinance was initially based on direction that we received from the board through two study sessions, one in February and another in April earlier this year, where we spent the better part of the day, and maybe the whole day, talking about what, after the board had determined that the desire of the majority to reverse the ban and move forward with the regulatory program, what should be in that regulatory program. So working with county council, we drafted the ordinance that, based on the direction that we had received. In the staff report, we sort of highlighted some of the key issues that had been discussed by the board. We then took that to the Planning Commission. Over a period of 3 meetings, they went through essentially line by line. We made a number of modifications to the ordinance. I have highlighted in the staff report as well where they had made changes to the ordinance from some of the specifics that were addressed by the board back in April. The environmental document that we're utilizing for this is the EIR that was prepared for the previously proposed regulatory ordinance. In the early 2016, the board had directed us to prepare a regulatory program. We began the process with a notice of preparation, and a draft ordinance had been prepared by staff that the board looked at and said, yes, this is essentially what we want. We know there will be changes, but this is essentially the program that we're looking forward to. That draft later was modified and became the urgency ordinance. The basis of the environmental analysis was that first draft of the ordinance. That draft allowed for cultivation on parcels as small as 2 acres. It included all of the commercial uses that the state law allowed, including manufacturing, testing, and distribution, and nurseries. It included personal cultivation, both indoor and outdoor. And the standards were significantly less than what was in both the urgency ordinance as well as the proposed ordinance that's before you today. The board ended up selecting one of the alternatives from that EIR, which was the ban. So the EIR was certified, the ban became the preferred alternative, if you would. It's really not the term of art that I'd like to use, but it was the alternative that the board selected, and that was the decision at that time. CEQA allows us to utilize an EIR for a project and to modify that project as long as it does not raise new significant impacts or there's new information that would change the findings that were made. In the staff report and in the addendum is the specific language of CEQA, trying to paraphrase it very briefly so not spend a lot of time going over that. And so looking at the proposal that the board had directed us to prepare, we found that the overall impact would be less because of the restrictions on the numbers of potential registrants. The EIR analyzed a total of 750 outdoor growers and 15 indoor cultivators. The proposal that's before you allows approximately 190, perhaps 200, based on a modification that the Planning Commission had made to the proposal, to the proposed ordinance. So we prepared an addendum that described the changes, the differences between the ordinances, and how or if they created any new impacts. And so we feel very comfortable that that is an adequate review of the change in the proposed ordinance. And I know that you've received correspondence that claim otherwise, and every attorney is welcome to their opinion, but we feel, we believe that we have adequately addressed the environmental issues associated with this ordinance. So as I said, that there were changes to the ordinance that reduced some of the impacts. Primarily among that is the change from a 2-acre minimum parcel size to a 20-acre minimum parcel size. Setbacks were increased from 30 feet to 75 feet or 150 feet in some instances where they're closer to residential parcels. Medical and adult use are now both allowed or directed by the board. Outdoor cultivation has been increased from half an acre to 1 acre, while mixed light remains the same and the indoor remains the same. And the number of potential applicants has been reduced from 765 to 190. What I'd like to go through are some changes that the Planning Commission has made, and more specifically, after we packaged up what the Commission had done, we realized we need to make a few additional changes. There is a RATA, or a recommended changes to the ordinance, and if you would bear with me for a little bit, I'd like to sort of go through that.
I was sort of thinking that what we could do is take this like we did with the general plan, and that might be the place to plug in the errata, so it's, you've got 1.5 pages, or do you have a better way that you'd like to approach this? Because eventually we're going to go through this section by section,
Okay.
probably line by line. But if you want to overview
If that's the desire
it.
of the board, we can certainly do it that way. One thing I'd like to point out that wasn't included in any of the documentation, and just sort of realized that this morning, was that the resolution of the Planning Commission included some findings related to the general plan and to consistency with zoning. And those weren't carried over automatically into the ordinance. So there were 2 findings in the Planning Commission's recommendation and their resolution that they adopted that should be incorporated into the Section 3 findings portion of the ordinance.
Are they part of the errata?
They're not included as part of the errata because we just sort of realized that this morning that we had overlooked that somehow that didn't carry over. So we would, I don't even have printed copies of, I have 1 printed copy of it, and we can either make copies during the break, I can get it so we can put it up on the screen. I suspect we probably won't finish today, and so we can have that ready for you tomorrow.
I think that when we get to the findings section, we could insert that and discuss it at that moment.
We've also made a few technical changes to the ordinance that we thought, we used the wrong term. And one of the things I'd like to show is just a little diagram here, so everyone's talking about the same thing. This is sort of my little sketch of some parcels that, down so the whole thing is there. So the blue lines are parcels. This orange area sort of represents what the state refers to as premises. And that would be anything where cannabis-related activity is occurring. The green area would be the cultivation area. And so we've used the term premises and cultivation area. They're almost the same, but not quite. The cultivation area is actually where live plants are growing. And so you might have, say, storage buildings or other material stored in this area that's not part of the cultivation area. We went around quite a bit with the Planning Commission trying to figure out where the appropriate term was. We had made some changes, and in fact, in the final version that was sent to you, we had changed cultivation area to premises in a couple of situations where we thought, we made a mistake here. This should have been premises. We've reviewed that again, and we'll probably need to go back, and maybe as we go through sort of each section, we can address those at that point in time. But I just wanted to make clear The other thing I wanted to talk about was two other terms that we call separation and setback. The setback is obviously the area, between the cultivation area or premises and the property line. So that would be the nearest section there. Separation, as it relates to a sensitive use, and there's certain things that are defined in sensitive use by state law. There's additional items that the Planning Commission added to that list. And that's measured in two ways. It's measured 1,200 feet from the premises or cultivation area to the boundary of the sensitive use, or 600 feet from the boundary of the parcel that the cultivation area owned. And this is the minimum requirement by state law. And this was something in addition that the board had directed at 1,000 feet and the Planning Commission changed to 1,200 feet. So just as we talk about these things, I sort of want to keep this diagram in mind so that as you're looking at it, and we can always bring it back up if there's some confusion on that. So without going into all of the detailed changes in the errata at this point in time, that really sort of concludes my presentation on the ordinance. If you have any questions sort of generally on the ordinance, we can talk about that now, and then I guess we can go in sort of
Are there any
section
questions
by section.
on the general ordinance? As I said before, we will go through this pretty much line by line. So, big picture questions for Planning Director? Okay, then before we start going line by line, yes, sir.
Any questions for staff?
If you have any questions.
Other than,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did want to note that we have several other department heads here that have some input. I know that we had talked quite a bit with the Environmental Management Agency about the water monitoring requirements. There's been quite a bit of discussion on that issue. Brad Banner, the agency director, had suggested some additional language change to that specific condition. I know that he is trying to get to a conference for the agency directors, and now would be a good time to maybe ask him any specific questions about that. I can put his proposed edits up on the screen if you want to sort of maybe detour to that specific point so that Brad can then get on to where he needs to be. He's been sort of waiting around all morning to talk about this one specific issue. It's up to the chair and the board as how you want to handle it. I just know that Brad, and I'm sure there are other, Rick is here and others who may be in the audience that might be able to answer questions you have as well.
I would really like to try to keep this in order. We have a big document and this thing could get jumbled up. Brad, are you able to stick around to the end of the day? Okay. Are there any staff that would like to make general comments on this? Seeing none, we'll move to public comment. It is, we will take a break at 3:15. Everybody did real well this morning. Let's have another civil discourse on this. So, 3 minutes. Al?
Al Segala, Taxpayer Association. This is very complicated. I understand that the state has regulations for commercial cannabis. I also understand that many counties and cities, don't know how many, have neither a ban or a regulatory ordinance, but all of them have to have permits. Okay, so if what we're required to have is a permit for commercial cannabis, cannot the basic requirements like the setbacks and some other things just be a condition of that permit and save this, just not do the big bureaucracy? Does that make sense? Thank you.
Public comment, take 5 at a time if you guys want to line up and make things go faster.
I'd just like to address something that the planning commissioner said, when you received the letter from the Calaveras residents against commercial marijuana, CRAM, the attorney's letter, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you say that the city attorney disagreed with the CRAM attorney and in regards to this new ordinance complies with the original EIR and the difference between the CRAM's attorney's opinion? Is that what you said, sir?
Excuse me, sir. Please, we just discussed this. Address the board, and this is not an exchange. He could have a rebuttal after the comments are done.
But you said that to me before, but we never had a rebuttal.
You keep the time running.
Isn't that correct? I asked a question, and you said I would get an answer later, and I never got one. So I'm addressing something that he said, so how do I get an answer? Is that the answer? No, nothing?
Sir, we are going to do, there can be a rebuttal. One of the Board of Supervisors can ask that question
Okay, so what I'm going to
afterwards.
say again is the CRAM attorney said that there was many changes that affected the original EIR. And this gentleman said that the city attorney didn't agree with the CRAM attorney. So that would lead me to think that there's a potential litigation in the future if the information that this guy duplicated with many precedents, legal precedents, about what you had to do with the new EIR, when you guys made this changes in this new ordinance, is not being recognized by the Planning Commission, and I don't know what else I can say because you're not going to respond. So that's it in a nutshell.
Next speaker.
Aurora Weatherby, District 5. Sorry I couldn't get here this morning, but I am here this afternoon. I have here some information for the board. It was mentioned in the Marijuana Business News about 3 supervisors that they talked to. I think that's it. And they give their viewpoints on the lawsuit against Calaveras County. And it says, Kesey said the lawsuit is a leverage tool for Calaveras cannabis growers because the county would find itself in a financial pickle. If the court rules, the county must repay the $6.3 million. It says that means the plaintiffs could decide whether to pursue legal actions, but if this board could be part of a bargain between the county official, they might find it favorable to drop the suit. It says, the financial threat to the county continued with new votes on the county board. The response to that was written by John Schroyer. In the comments back to this article, one of them specifically says, while they're at it, they need to replace the entire planning commission, which has been done. I have the questionnaire on the top is questions that have been asked of this board throughout the history of the cannabis ordinance plus post-cannabis apportment, which we've never gotten the answers to. I'm giving you 7 questions, and I would like answers to those questions if you have to do an audit of each department. I am a taxpayer here, and I pay my taxes. There's $3.5 million in the cannabis tax that has not been collected. I want to know the answer to these questions, and that is one of them. I attended the Planning Commission on the ordinance. I got the original ordinance as written by Mr. Maurer. I got like about 5 different packets of pages and changes from Mr. Laddish. Those changes were done and are on this current ordinance to be discussed line by line. I had the opportunity to sit down in my home and read them, and what it does is it gives carte blanche to the growers. There's no hard regulation there. Anybody needs to read that. Also, it is offensive to people. I had out-of-state visitors at my home Thursday, and the marijuana came wafting into the room. The stench is horrible. We had to close up the house. We couldn't even couldn't even enjoy part of our visit because the stench was so terrible. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Could you put up the previous page? So I can see, that's what I'm supposed to talk on, right? So, issuance of permits. It doesn't really talk about how you're going to make sure people are still in compliance and gain access to the properties once you've issued a permit. We've seen the destruction of homes around here. Apparently, you know, they have an inspector go through and look at the properties when they buy the home, and then after the sheriff's department goes through, because they've had a grow in there, place is crap, and it isn't, you know, fixed. Transfers of permits, well, that's just an open door to a bunch of, you know, misuse. But the thing that's the most important here is remediation and restoration of former cannabis cultivation sites. Well, you got that in there because they're going to be dropping a bunch of crap on the property, a whole bunch of chemicals. I lived near a steel plant for 25, 30 years. It was a toxic waste site. It was never cleaned up. So we've already had these problems of dumping chemicals, and as the people said this morning, these places have not been cleaned up yet. So the homes that are not going to be able to go back on the market, the properties that are not going to be able to be sold, you want to plant your vegetable garden in the chemicals they're using? I don't think so. I have worked in the chemical industry, and when this stuff is dropped on the ground, it doesn't go away. It leaches into the ground. It goes downhill into the water supplies. We're going to be stuck with this. You're not going to be able to clear out a lot of this stuff. How far down are you going to dig, and what are you going to do with the toxic soil that's left behind? What are you going to do with the toxic debris from inside the homes that's left behind? We're going to have to open another waste dump and just keep opening dump sites. It's ridiculous, and I think this is poorly thought out. So my concern is how you're really going to police this and make sure that people are complying when it shouldn't even be allowed in the first place.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hey guys, I know I spoke earlier. I just wanted to redirect this question because Jack told me to ask it or talk about it at this time. Just wanted to see if we were going to follow through on what we had previously spoken about, the people who were within good standing, but for whatever reason did not make it through. And the only reason I asked this is because, you know, Al, you and I have had conversation in the past. I saw in one of the previous PowerPoints early this morning, there was a little underlined squiggly thing that had said something about the state, temporary as well too. I just wanted to say, hopefully we can put into this some little subsection, as long as you're within good standing of the county, because you couldn't have been in good standing elsewhere if you weren't within the county. You know, maybe we should aim it that way. Also, I know this isn't going to be a popular one, but I'm just going to throw it out there real quick. To mirror what I said earlier, a lot of us, our families, we don't have the ability to just pick up, sell our house, move our kids, and we'll take this piece of ag or commercial or unclassified that people are now going to jack up through the roof 300%. I can't move my kids and whatnot. I'm on over 20 acres. You could put over 88 airline strips, actual legal ones. You could put over 15 football fields. You could put over 3.5 baseball stadiums. You can do all of these things on my property. That's a lot of space, guys. You know, like I said, I might be RR. I'm in District 2. You know, I mean, a lot of us in Mountain Ranch are, but a lot of us in Mountain Ranch, I don't bother anyone. Both sides know me. If you're going to put people up here, put people who are part of the community. I'm not one of those, you know, bad growers. You come to my house, meet my kids. see my property, you're never going to see a problem with it. Courtney Meinhardt was the first guy to ever come to my place, and he is the first one to tell me, this is an amazing property, you did a great job here. I'm on RR, I'm on 20 acres. I doubled my setbacks when you guys only required 75 before you even requested it. Those are the people that are in District 2. These are the people that have mountains, you know. I invite you to come to my place. If you ever heard of the castle, the big old mountain in Mountain Ranch, right off of Sheep Ranch or Mountain Ranch, that's my place. Come on by. You know, I might be RR, but I won't disappoint. I promise I'll be far away from everything. No complaints by any neighbors ever, and never will be. Think about us. We're the people that are going to keep this thing going for you guys.
Terry?
Sarah McBride, District 2. I do not grow, and I don't want to. I want people like that young man and others that are sitting out there wondering if they're going to have a career in this county or not to grow. The anger in here is palatable, and it's correct. I mean, we have had illegals take over. It's not the good guys' fault. They're the ones that want to follow the rules. They want to pay the permits. They want to do whatever they can so that they can grow a valid crop that got misaligned in people's minds because of politics and money. Now, that never happens, and it's happened again. And I would say that there's some valid things here. We want the small guys. We don't want the illegals, and the illegals are pretty much who these folks are irritated at with good reason. They need to go out and out. I don't know how you're going to do it, but it's got to be done. But I'm here to tell you the ban didn't work. It did not work because there are a lot of them still growing after the ban. So why even think about doing that again? Let's get this thing going right. Let's get the permit. Let's work with the good growers so that we can get the agriculture of this county. Let's keep it rural. That's wonderful. Folks lived in the city and retired up here. Well, I lived here, and I'm retired pretty much. Well, I'll never quit. But the reality is I don't want to have to change everything, make them happy. Why should we have to? It's an agriculture county. And as long as the folks that are here that are trying to do the right thing, you see how many folks got little kids that grow? They don't want anything happening to their youngsters either. You can't treat them like they're dirt. These are good people. These are farmers. You ought to treat them like it. They want to follow the rules. They want to pay the taxes. For God's sakes, how many corporations or businesses want to pay taxes so that they can do a business in this county? Want to donate to the different organizations and participate and be a part of the community. These are the folks that you want. It's a permit process and such. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning ground. It's a way to start. And then give Rick everything he needs so he can go after these illegals. None of us like them. I got some people around us again, and we've had them over and over and over. They're a pain. I hate them. But that's not these folks here that are speaking up on behalf of growing legally. These are the folks that are being hurt by that just as much as these folks here that feel so upset. Anyway, I hope that everyone would just take some time and breathe, meet the farmers. They're good folks. And let's make this work. Let it be good for the county.
Thank you. Ms. Morris?
Susan Morris, District 4. I want to speak about the process. Calaveras Residence has hired legal counsel who has set forth in a detailed letter why the county's approach to these actions today violates the California Environmental Quality Act and state planning and zoning law. Each of you were served with a letter dated September 30th from Shute, Mahaley, and Weinberger yesterday, as well as a hard copy was personally delivered to the clerk of the board, Rebecca Turner. I recommend that the supervisors carefully review it if you have not. This is the document. Okay? Public? The county must prepare a new EIR for the proposed cultivation ordinance rather than an addendum or a subsequent EIR. The county's reliance on an EIR for a project that was never approved is an unlawful end run around CEQA. The county previously approved and adopted findings relating to the ban ordinance, not the prior cultivation ordinance. There is no indication in the county's findings adopting the ban ordinance that the county adopted or even considered the ER's alleged analysis of the prior cultivation ordinance. The county thus cannot rely on an old EIR to adopt the new cultivation ordinance. Further, as described in the legal counsel's letter, the new ordinance is so different from prior cultivation ordinance that the old EIR is no longer relevant. Even if the old EIR is relevant to the new ordinance, which it is not, the addendum still violates CEQA and the county must prepare a subsequent EIR. The county has eliminated mitigation measures from the old EIR that will lead to new significant impacts. For example, the increase in maximum allowable area for cultivation site in the ordinance allowance of multiple sites per acre could lead to significant environmental impacts related to hydrology and water quality, biology resources, noise, and odors. The addendum does not adequately analyze the implications of these changes in the proposed ordinance, which could allow massive cannabis cultivation complexes covering and befouling many acres. The county cannot simply disregard mitigation measures that the old EIR found necessary because they are no longer convenient. Please, make sure you've read this. Make sure you've looked at it before you make any vote today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Jennifer Stewart, District 2. Even the name of the old EIR said medical use only, and that even the new name, considering personal use, that is a substantial difference. But besides that, the county must develop a new EIR report to address new information about widespread illegal cannabis cultivation activities. That wasn't even brought up before. The county now has 3 years of enforcement data that it did not have when it began developing the prior EIR. We now know that illegal cultivation activities are rampant. Further, even legal permitted cultivation sites across California use illegal pesticides. One study determined an anticoagulant rodenticide is probably ubiquitous at California cannabis cultivation sites. And carbofuran is a banned pesticide, has been found in Calaveras County. The sheriff brought that up. Changes to the ordinance may encourage additional illegal activity. For example, reducing violations from misdemeanors to infractions may reduce the ordinance deterrent effect and bring even more illegal activity into our county. Pesticides like carbofuran and anticoagulant rodenticides have devastating effects on wildlife. Pesticides at California grow sites have already killed bears, foxes, fishers, squirrels, deer, passerine birds, and likely northern spotted owls, threatened species. The county must study this new information in a subsequent EIR that fully addresses the devastating impacts that pesticides and other hazardous materials associated with cannabis cultivation can have on wildlife. In the meantime, the county must reject the proposed ordinance to protect wildlife. If you don't want to protect people, protect wildlife.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Vicki Reinke. A lot has been said. I'm also with the Calaveras Residents Against Commercial Marijuana, and it was part of this letter that was sent. First of all, I'd like to ask if you guys would reconsider and break up your comments from the audience on the subjects. The EIR subject is one subject that is extremely important. Since we've learned what cannabis growing has done in a lot of areas with the environment. You know me, I'm not the biggest environmentalist when it comes to the really far out things, but this isn't far out for cannabis because there's been studies, there's been research, and we know that this industry uses a lot of fertilizer, a lot of pesticides. We don't even know what a legal grow is supposed to be using. That's never come out, and this needs to be addressed, and it should be addressed through this EIR. So I would hope that maybe the board would vote to reconsider that, and so that we can comment on this EIR, and then also comment when you get to the ordinance, which is a whole separate topic. So anyway, that's my request. And as far as the EIR and redoing the EIR, I agree totally. even just on the idea that you're going to do co-location of marijuana is a whole new topic. You're going to have 1 acre of grow per 20 acres, and you could put 5 of those on a 100-acre lot. That means water is going to be sucked out of that little area for 1 acre, 5 acres of grows. That's different than when we had them all spread around the county. So that alone should make you realize that a new EIR should be done and protect our environment here. We're a watershed. It's extremely important that we don't damage that. I don't know why the Bay Area is not coming up here and protesting as well, because it's their water. So anyway, I hope you will reconsider. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker. Ms. Cordo? If you'd like to speak, if you could please line up 5 deep, no more. It'll speed things along. Okay, no one's lining up, so Ms. Cordo, just half a second. Raise your hand if you want to speak. Okay, we got a lot of you. Please help me keep things moving along. Ms. Cordo, thank you for your patience.
What is the definition of neighborhood? I grew up where our neighbors lived 2 miles away. This is my definition of a neighbor. Back when I got involved with this issue, I went to a Democrat meeting so that I could say how I felt about pot, because they said they were making it available, and I hadn't gone to the Board of Supervisors at that time. And then I wrote a letter to the editor of the Calaveras Enterprise. Dianne Feinstein on the radio recently stated that she did not support the legalization of marijuana. She said there is a chemical, not THC, in it that is very bad for the user. She said traffic accidents caused by pot and prescription medicine cause the same or near the same amount of accidents as alcohol-related accidents. There is no breathalyzer to determine this intoxicated state like there is for alcohol, so it is up to the law enforcement officer to guess. The young, wet, behind-the-ears entrepreneurs appealing to the populace and their government servants are luring them with a green phallus on a stick, claiming the promise to plump up governmental coffers. There is a certain animal that likes carrots and will blindly follow them anywhere. The name of the animal eludes me. From my standpoint, if a family is dropped in the middle of the Sahara Desert and given no water to reach a far-off oasis, that is like making the promise of companionship and love and support a family deserves from each other, only to find one or more members' bodies are there, but they are not. There are some things that money cannot buy or rectify.
My name's Ellen Acosta. I'm just very saddened by, this county has 45,000 people in it. Is that what you guys said? And we've represented it. You can multiply my opinion times 20, okay, at least, that I know of, that do not want cannabis here. And it's going to come down to you guys voting for it. We tried to get the county to put it up for a vote, and it got shot down. I just think it's wrong that 3 people on this board are going to pass this cannabis, and none of the people that work 8 to 5 out there can come to these meetings, voice their opinion. And Mr. Stopper, I know you just got elected, but I know lots of people in that district that do not want it. And I don't think you're representing our county fairly. Should have been voted on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Bill McManus again. Again, I come with questions about the process of whether the ordinance drives the EIR or vice versa. Of course, the ordinance hasn't even been addressed yet for the second go-around, and we're relying on an EIR that is disputed. And as Mr. Mauer said, everyone's attorney has their own thought on it. Well, until a judge decides, I think that's probably where we should go with it. Some of the things about the EIR are a little troubling. This will also come up in the ordinance, and that is 1795.050, Section D 1B, which talks about the applications. And the way it is written, it is for as long as they did not withdraw the application or have it denied or revoked by the county. And you come up and say, well, that's going to be about 190 people. Well, what's missing, as in everything in this whole fiasco, it's the stuff that's missing that's important, not the stuff that's in here. What about the validated, pending, and verified applications that were in? How many people were there? They are not excluded. The ordinance includes everyone but in 2 classes, revoked and denied. These people haven't been accounted for yet. So the 190 number is probably incorrect. The other thing that has changed completely, hugely changed everything, is the co-location, which at one point was going to be limited to 5. Now it's only limited by property, and that's 20 acres. So on a 1,000-acre lot, you could have 50 one-acre grows, with the water requirements the same for each one and not included in the group. So if you want to do well testing on property one at a time and see how it recovers, up to 90%, that's all, that's a false test. During the season, all those wells are going to be pumped. So if you do a test, you need to have a hydrologist there to determine where the aquifer is and pump all the wells in that aquifer at the same time. That more closely matches what is going to happen in the season. If those wells can't produce enough water during the testing, how are they going to produce enough water during the season? Again, that is a falsehood that's been presented to us. Like the co-locations aren't going to hurt anything. The application, no, it's only going to be 190, don't worry about it. We've heard at the Planning Commission there could be as many as 700 people coming back in. So far, no one's addressed that, but I think it's something we'd like to know about, and whether the EIR or the ordinance is leading this parade, because you can't keep switching them around, putting one in front of the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Once again, if you'd like to speak, it would be helpful if you would line up.
I'm Levon Miller of Mountain Ranch, District 2. I just want to bring up a couple of clarifications for everyone who maybe hasn't been familiar with some of these details. I've heard the argument quite a few times today that the Calaveras County residents have voted against regulation. I'm a grower, and I can personally vouch for a minimum of 12 folks in my tiny sphere who were growers who do support regulation but didn't feel that they could vote for that regulation as though it was drafted. So to make the assumption that everyone in the county voted against it because they don't want regulation is just purely false. The next point that I'd like to make is that the assessment that 190 folks are going to be applying, or perhaps the 150 with a little bit of a metric to adjust the number there, I think is also inaccurate, simply because I personally know of so many registered growers who have completely left the area. We need to take into account that I would say that you'd probably be looking at closer to 75 or 100 applicants, simply because those people don't exist in the county anymore, and they've already set up businesses in other counties. They can't pull up stakes and come back to a county where they may be put out of business the next time that the board changes. So that goes to my next point, is that those of us who have already gone through the problem of setting up farms, creating a business, giving the majority of our money back to the community in the form of taxes and fees, to only have a ban imposed upon us to legally eradicate our farms, go into 9-to-5 jobs again to try to get by, to yet again make this huge investment. What guarantee do we have the next time that the board changes, we're not just going to be put out of business yet again? So to that sentiment, it'd be nice to have some time frame to at least allow us to recover our initial investment before the rug is pulled out from under us. That would help to encourage compliant folks to come and participate in this program and actually have some faith in it that our government is going to back us up. Okay, in the interest of having 1 minute left, I'd like to bring to everyone's attention that under state regulations, we need to do a rigorous testing. Cannabis is the most tested product on the planet as far as pesticides. and all of the negative chemicals that keep being discussed. So if we put those things into our farms, we can't sell our product. So it's a misnomer to associate chemicals with organic regulated farming. On co-locations, we fully support that, mainly in the interest of oversight, so that when the inspectors come out to inspect multiple farms, when the sheriff is here to make sure that everything is being done properly, you can go to one location and see multiple sites at once. It reduces the cost for the taxpayers, reduces the impact on the environment, because you're concentrating on an appropriate location and not creating more roads and traffic in between multiple sites. Another issue is the metric that's coming up. Everything is going to be tracked, traced through the state. Look at state, see how well we're going to be regulated.
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Thank you.
Tina?
Hi, Dina Morris. I would like to say to everybody watching, listening, don't be fooled. In that article that talked about the lawsuit, the Guerrero lawsuit, Kesey, the CFO of Golden State Herb, said in there that it could potentially be 750 farms strong when new regulations are written. Jack Garamendi hedged and said only about 200 farms were identified as potentially being viable for county permits. Those should get first crack when or if the county issues licenses. So he didn't deny that there could be 750 farms. Now, having said that, we're going to allow larger maximum allowable areas for cultivation, and that's a change that will lead to significant environmental impacts related to hydrology, water quality, biological resources, noise, and odors, which are the #1 complaint under the UO, which isn't addressed in this new ordinance that I could find. So in the EIR, the existing EIR, it said an outdoor grow, half acre, is 390,000 gallons of water per season. So multiply that times 2, because now we're going to allow 1 acre. That's 780,000 gallons per season. Now times that by 5 acres, since we can have 5 acres on a 100-acre lot, and that's almost 4 million gallons. Multiply that by 190 permits, 780,000 gallons per acre, that's 150 million gallons of water that's going to get pulled out of the ground. And if we have, let's say, 700 grows, well, that's almost, that is 500 million gallons of water coming out of the ground. Now, I'd like to remind everybody, there are many areas in Calaveras County, including the area I live in, Copperopolis, where the water tables are low to none. So you go through these water testing things and you dry up other people's wells. That's not right. And that's going to put the county in a very bad spot. A supplemental EIR, Environmental Impact Report, is needed to examine these potentially devastating new impacts. It also serves as a public notice of the proposed project and the significant effects on it. We have a whole different status now than we did when we had the UO. The UO, we had this influx of green rush, we had all these grows.
Thank you very much.
Now we
Tina.
don't.
Appreciate it. I'm going to assume that he's the last speaker since no one else is getting up. Anybody else want to talk? Okay. Jed, you'll be the final speaker.
Hello, Board. Trevor Whitkey. Many speakers have come up today and expressed their concerns regarding problems associated with existing illicit cultivation throughout the county. We're presented with two possible solutions to this set of problems. On the one side, there's the ban, which has not eliminated or remediated any of the impacts associated with illicit cultivation, as acknowledged by essentially every speaker. With the ban, there's no funding to address the problems associated with illegal activities and no way of encouraging or attracting good actors to come into the county. Instead, we will continue to attract those who wish to ignore the laws and only do what they would do historically, which is ignore all of the existing codes and create the problems that were displayed in all of the pictures that we saw earlier today. On the other hand, with revised 1795, we're presented with a regulatory option that would create a system of taxation and regulation that would create a revenue stream and a set of laws that would protect public safety, drive compliance, addressing the many issues brought up by those concerned with cannabis cultivation. The proposed fee of $12,000 is more than 2 times larger than that under the urgency ordinance. It would create a revenue stream of $2.4 million to cover all of the cost. And if any uncovered costs were discovered through the fee study, those would have to be covered by those participating in the regulatory program. The proposed maximum canopy considered under the proposed ordinance of 196 farms being able to grow 43,560 square feet of canopy, if taxed at $2 per square foot, would equal $87,120 in taxes per farm. This equals $17 million in Measure C tax revenue. Last time, every one of these farms paid their taxes, every single one of them. That's the only way any of these 196 farms could actually get into this regulatory program, is because they paid their taxes. People keep on mentioning Crystal Kesey and the Greer lawsuit. Crystal Kesey and the rest of those individuals are unable to make it into the regulatory program because they did not pay their Measure C taxes. That's one of the ironies of their lawsuits. They didn't even pay their Measure C taxes. Furthermore, the issue here about the wells. The well yield pump test requirements in the draft ordinance are excessive compared to agricultural municipal uses. The ordinance would be stronger and less vulnerable to challenge if it simply required well performance tests accordance to state regulations in Title 22, Section 64554G, respectfully submitted by John Kramer. John Kramer is a PhD hydrologist. I think his word on this goes above and any of us. The guy has a PhD and is well studied and understands the implications on hydrology, and so I would take what he has proposed. Furthermore, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pitke. Mr. Larson, you were in the other room, right? Okay, you are our last speaker, and we are closing public comment.
Good afternoon, Jed Richardson, Mountain Ranch. I hope to offer some comments that will be constructive to the regulations. Under the personal non-commercial cultivation, I think we need to eliminate the requirement for screening of plants from view. That somehow stayed there even though it was eliminated from the commercial requirement, even though the setbacks are the same. Last thing we need is a rural neighborhood of property after property of shade cloth flapping in the wind. I'm sure we've seen that. The commercial cultivation, the proposed well capacity testing procedure is unclear, potentially flawed, as Trevor has pointed out. I'd just like to point out that assuming an average agricultural well capacity of 25 gallons a minute and 200 approved cultivators, the current proposed testing will cause 21.6 million gallons of water to be wasted per year by dumping on the ground to evaporate. This really doesn't make sense when the overall goal is water conservation. Also, most of the suitable sites for commercial cannabis cultivation in the county are off the grid. These sites will be powered by photovoltaics with battery banks and generator backup. It should be understood that generators will be running to recharge those batteries during inclement weather. RIM fees for cannabis cultivation sites in the past have been as much as double those for similar agricultural operations. RIM fees should be based solely on actual impacts on roads, primarily by passenger vehicles, with limited commercial trucks during harvest. The addition of school bus stops as sensitive sites is unworkable. This was discussed in the original urgency ordinance. School buses typically stop every half mile to mile. This would mean that most properties on a route with a school bus would become unsuitable for cultivation. Also, school bus routes and stops change on a regular basis. The requirement that the current property owner be jointly responsible with the grower for site remediation will likely lead to litigation. Many former grow properties have changed ownership many times with the current owner not aware of the potential liability. Water trucks should be allowed as a secondary source of water for emergency situations, such as a failed well pump, which could take a week or more to be corrected. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Larson?
Reed Larson, Mountain Ranch. I want to express my support for cannabis cultivation. Let's get these jobs back. I do, however, take issue with setbacks associated with personal cannabis cultivation. 150-foot setbacks for individuals adjacent to residential parcels is unacceptable. Cannabis consumers, and more specifically, medical cannabis patients, should be allowed to cultivate their 6 plants in a small backyard. Furthermore, medical cannabis patients should be allowed to cultivate more numerous plants in a designated small square footage without setbacks. Thank you.
Thank you. That was brief. Marie, you will be really the last one, and we're taking a break.
Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Marie Wright. I live in District 2 and have a business in District 1. As we all know, this county needs local businesses to provide tax revenue and jobs for its citizens. For many years, our state has been putting up obstacle after obstacle and adding regulatory and other expenses to businesses, and as a result, many of the businesses have left the state. Putting up unnecessary hurdles for cannabis farms will not help the county. By making things more difficult, some farms will decide that it isn't worth the extra effort and costs and will relocate to counties that are more inviting. We will lose jobs and businesses, not just from the direct farm owners and employees, but all the businesses that cater to the everyday needs of the workers, such as restaurants, stores, contractors, even law firms that need people to purchase our goods and services. Since the county has decided to allow limited cannabis farms here in Calaveras, it is key that we get the farms thoroughly checked out and then that the farms that will be responsible neighbors and businesses get approved as quickly as possible. Everyone familiar with agriculture will understand that it is vitally important to help the county economy by getting the farms up and running by spring so that we can have tax revenue and jobs all year long. The delay of even a few months will cost the county and our local businesses the entire benefit of farm job revenue for the whole year. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my comments.
Thank you. We're going to resume at 3:30. Thank you. All right, welcome back. You got to sit down. All right, welcome back to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors. We have completed public comment. We will, any further comment from Mr. Mauer or questions for him before we start going into the nitty gritty? Mr. Mauer, do you have anything?
Just a couple of responses to some of the comments. Question was asked whether or not we disagreed with the letter from Shoot Mahaley. We do disagree with the conclusions that they reached. Mr. Castanis brought up an issue about not getting a state license because the ban went into effect before the state could finish processing a few applications. The Planning Commission made a change to the ordinance that would allow those people that were in process with the state but didn't complete the licensing process to be eligible to apply. So we don't know the number. It might be 6 to 10 perhaps, but I wanted to just assure Mr. Castanis as well as the board that that was one of the edits that the Planning Commission made, and that's why we say about 190. The numbers that, we've also heard other numbers such as 750, and that's patently false. We have a list of the licenses that were issued by the state. We compared those against those who were in good standing, and that included the validated and all the various terms we use for different stages in the process. If they had not been denied or not been revoked, and they were in good standing with the county, either we'd issued the permit or we were still in the process of reviewing their application, they would be eligible to apply. Doesn't mean they're automatically approved, that means they're eligible to apply. I think that really is just the only issues that I had. There was another question or an issue raised about the changing the, what's the term, from the reduction of the penalty from a misdemeanor to an infraction. We discussed that at the Planning Commission. If that's a concern, Ethan Turner is here, who worked with the Sheriff's Office and my office to craft that, the section on penalties for violations, and he can explain in more detail why that change was made. So unless there's other questions that you have of me, we can start sort of going through some of the changes that we're suggesting at this point. So I'll open up for questions.
Supervisor Mills, you have a question?
Yes, we're going to take the environmental impact report separately then, Chair?
We'll take that on after we finish 17.
Great, thank you.
Discuss that, but the comment was over both. So we will not have another public comment on that, although we will have one at the end. Okay, you guys ready? I think we know how this works generally. We'll take the same approach we took to the general plan. We'll go section by section. Somebody has a suggestion, we'll note it. If you got 3 people who want to talk about it, we'll discuss it and move forward. If there is not, we will not. Everybody got it? Very well.
Sir?
Yep.
Just one question prior to going into this. There will be certain questions to staff as we do this on certain things. But I think there is some staff here that has information that we can possibly ask before. Do you want to wait till later to ask those questions?
Why don't we take the section, if staff have particular expertise or information, we could insert it into that. What I'm worried about is we start getting so spread out, we can never get down to the detail. So if you got something specifically you want to bring up, and it's germane to where we are, that's fine.
So we're proceeding with this and then staff later.
Well, as we go through each section, for example, 1795010, the purpose and intent, I'd like to know everybody's comments, people's thoughts. We'll judge whether this is something we want to continue. If staff have input on that section or there's a specific reason they've got that in there, we should have a discussion as we move forward.
Understood. I just thought of where I could insert the questions pertinent to a few issues that would be the sheriff and code compliance, but I could probably get that down with the findings at the end.
Okay.
Okay.
Purpose and intent, section 1795.010. Suggestions, changes, questions. Supervisor Callaway?
Towards the last sentence, to the extent deemed necessary, I thought it should be to the extent allowed under state law.
Is there any comments or thoughts on that? Mr. Maurer, is that Ms. Moss?
The only concern there is that we're not allowing all of the types of cannabis activities that are allowed under state law, and so the concern is that somebody could say our intent doesn't match the body of the ordinance.
So what does deemed necessary mean?
To where we don't have a choice under state law.
You can have that one.
I agree with Ms. Moss. That's the way I read it, and it's necessary regardless of the situation.
Under section B?
I have one change, sir, under section B. I just want to make sure, because I printed up, or I have the one before me. It is also the purpose and intent of this chapter to develop reasonable regulations. The reasonable regulations prior to prevent commercial cannabis cultivation in higher density residential zones to minimize its impact on residents. That's in there as I read it.
Yes.
The current draft? Okay, I would like to add a sentence to the end of B, which coincides with some changes I'm going to make later, or transfer their license to an entity with an appropriate site.
So is there any reason we can't do that, Mr. Meyer, before I poll on this?
Could you repeat that line again?
Okay, at the very end of B, after with compatible zoning, or transfer their license to an entity with an appropriate site.
I see no problem with that.
Very well, would you like me to poll on that? Who would like to make that change? Supervisor Toffenelli?
Sure.
Supervisor Topper?
Yes.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
Supervisor Callaway?
Yes.
5-0, that change is made. Other items?
Item
Supervisor
B.
Toffenelli? B?
It says, to minimize the impact on residents, but to also provide those state-compliant commercial medical cannabis cultivators who complied with May 10th, 2016 version of this chapter. I'd like to also add, and are current with Measure C, and with the ban ordinance as far as remediating their properties.
Mr. Mauer, are you understanding what he's suggesting?
Yes.
Is there any reason we can't do that? I know it's held on, I know it's noted several points later on.
Not the,
It is later on.
not the
but-
Measure C so much, though, I think.
Yeah.
So the intent, it's a bit redundant, but I could go with that personally.
Is there any, so there's no reason we can't do that, so.
No, all these things, the transfer, the ordinance provides for a lot of these things that we're just talking about in the intent section,
Well,
but
right.
no, there's no reason you
Right,
can't.
it's just stating an intent.
I'm aware of that.
Mr. Supervisor Toffenelli, would you like me to poll on that?
Yes.
So Supervisor Toffenelli, yes. Supervisor
Yes.
Stopper, Supervisor Mills,
Yes.
Supervisor Kelly,
Yes.
Supervisor Govindy, that change happens.
Well, actually, I was after B as my, as
Okay,
well.
well, we can make more to be if you got it.
Well, I'm
Supervisor Mills?
thinking in terms of, in terms of currency with Measure C taxes, what about currency with property taxes, fines, penalties, or any other tax fees that are due the county? Would the board be willing to accept that as a broader statement?
No.
He's not polling yet.
The,
Oh, I'm sorry.
is there any reason we can't do that before I poll?
No, I'm just concerned that we're going to rewrite the whole thing and not be able to do this while
Yes.
we're
We're-
going along.
Let's see how we do it. Supervisor Mills, yes? Supervisor Stopper,
No.
Supervisor Toffenelli,
Can you state it again, what you're saying?
That the applicant needs to be current with all taxes, fees, fines, penalties, et cetera. Whatever money is due the county, that it is current.
I'm not so sure. I could understand the property taxes if they owned the property. A lot of them didn't own the property. They were leasing it, so, whether they're current, the person they were leasing from was current or not is really not up to them to be able to remediate that. Fines, I'm not so sure under, are you talking about related to this business or just fines like you got a fine because you were after dark walking the streets and the sheriff gave you a fine for something? I'm not sure what you're saying, so.
That's the reason I said no, because it's pretty encompassing.
Yeah, I'm not trying to pick on the sheriff here. I was just trying to be sure because
Or one
it
of his
says,
deputies.
this has been brought up by staff that, for instance, where there were potential monies due the county, that we made sure if this person was due those, or the money was due, that it was brought current.
No, right now. Maybe if we get further into this thing, there'd be an opportunity to do that.
okay. No also. So that does not get inserted. Other items on 1795-010. All right. We're going on to 1795-020, definitions. Does anybody have? And folks, I'm working from the red line version, so if you're, if we call the pages, we have to be pretty exact.
We have suggested edits to PP, MMM, and NNN.
PP, what's the other one? Scott?
Triple M and triple N.
I have some of those also, sir, and more, and addition. So,
Mr. Mauer, would you like to start off with double M or triple M?
Let's maybe just go in order. We'll start with
PP?
double P, and that was included in the suggested changes. We just feel like we should strike what should have been all in parentheses, but only had the beginning parentheses, because Malcursa actually meant more than just what's in the Business and Professions Code. So we just didn't need that, so we're recommending that be struck, as shown in the on the screen here and in the errata or the suggested edits.
Is there any objection to that from the board? Seeing no objection, that stands.
The next one we had was triple M.
Okay.
And there's a similar edit to triple N as well. The phrase, when applied to commercial cannabis premises, doesn't need to be in there. The other thing that I wanted to bring up in this case is, if you recall the diagram I showed earlier that showed the measurement from the cultivation site or in the premises. We went back and forth on this one quite a bit. The Planning Commission actually had recommended the term between a cultivation site or a parcel. We felt that our interpretation of the state law initially was that we should be measuring it from the premises, but second reading or 14th reading of that provision of the code believed that the Planning Commission's recommendation was correct, that should be between a cultivation site or a parcel. And the same thing with on the definition of setback, that should also be retained as cultivation site.
So that's not,
It's
not what you've got up there, right? You're
So right,
saying-
in this one it says, right here, between a premises or parcel, that should be changed to cultivation site. Otherwise, the edit with striking that first phrase, we would recommend that be done.
Does anybody have a change to Mr. Mauer's correction on triple M?
not at all. I agree with it. That's what I have here, cultivation site. Premise defines everything used for a business. So a well that was 100 feet away would be part of a premise as opposed to the actual cultivation site. Am I correct?
Okay, so you've got no objection, your changes to triple M to cultivation site stand. On number, you had triple N. You wanted to change the same thing, cannabis premise to cultivation site?
Yes.
I agree with that based on the same principle. And then I have an addition later on in triple N once everyone decides on that.
Okay, why don't you put forward that and we'll just do triple N altogether.
Because some parcels were not necessarily, that is, at the very end, I want to add or least. Setback when applied to commercial cannabis cultivation sites means the horizontal distance that is required between cannabis premises,
Cultivation site.
cultivation sites, and the nearest property line of a parcel that is not owned or leased by permitting.
Anybody, any reason we can't do that, Mr. Mauer?
That was discussed by the Planning Commission in the context, it probably doesn't matter in this case, well, for commercial cultivation where there is a permit required, we have the provision that you could lease property, and so something that's commonly owned or leased, that would apply. For personal cultivation, the commission felt that it should just be ownership because we really don't have the same level of control, and someone could lease property and then the lease be terminated, and then we've got the setback problem. So that was why we left it just simply as owned by the permittee in this case. It's sort of an either or depending on which setback is being applied.
Right, and I get the intent behind that. I would say commonly owned or commonly leased would cover that, because someone could be leasing a property with a house on it that has multiple parcels overall. So in that case, if they're commonly leased,
It's really a policy call whether or not you want to include the ability for someone who has leased property to make it from the farthest away property line that's not under their control. I would not use the term commonly owned or commonly leased because it could be commonly owned by someone else.
all right,
But I think we need to refer to the permittee in this case.
understood.
So, Mr. Stopper, your suggestion is go along with Mr. Mauer's premise, the cultivation site, but and not owned or leased by the permittee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
Anybody on the board, I mean, is there any objection to that? Seeing none, we will add that in. Mr. Mauer, do you have others?
After P, seeing as we have these in alphabetical order, so triple P, in that area, I would like, because it's referred to multiple times throughout the ordinance, and it needs a definition, successor and interest. I don't have a suggested definition for that, but I have not found that successor and interest is defined in this in any way, so for that to be defined as needed.
Sorry, Supervisor Stopper, are you talking about triple P?
Well, right after triple P, the successor and interest is the definition I would like to add,
Oh, okay.
which would fall after state license types or state, it's in alphabetical order, sir, so it would come after triple P.
So you want to add a definition of successor of interest? Mr. Mauer?
It's a legal term of art, and I don't know that it's necessary, but probably it's not harmful to add it. Unless we get into some conflict between what our code says and what the law says regarding that issue. So I would defer to council on this one.
Understood.
Council, can we put that in?
You certainly can. I'm wondering whether on the fly, we're going to be very successful at coming up with a better definition than the actual term successor in interest. But we can.
Mr. Stopper?
So define what it means.
The person who owns the business or parcel afterwards. So, if owners transfer a business to the next owner, then they own it. But I'm not sure it would take, doing something like this on the fly and coming up with something that includes words that people don't argue about, my recommendation would be to not mess with that. But if you guys want to, absolutely, we could take a few minutes and do that.
We could always come back to this later after we get through more of the ordinance to see if we need it, if we need to. I'm not going to die on this hill. I was just making a suggestion because I've never seen it defined within the ordinance, and I felt that it was needed.
Successor in interest is a legal term of art, but to the extent that the board wants us to add an actual definition within the ordinance, we could add something along the lines of a successor in interest means a successor to another's interest in property, especially a successor in ownership of a business that is carried on and controlled substantially as it was before the transfer. Something along those lines. But that would be, if the board is wanting to do these changes, what I would suggest is the direction, and then staff be given the opportunity to then work on these changes. It's not that trying to craft on the fly is not recommended. I would ask that any suggested changes like this be direction for us to go back, do, and bring back the ordinance at a future date.
Stopper, do you want to table it still, or do you want to drive on?
Let's drive on, and then possibly tomorrow, maybe if staff has something legitimate to bring forward as we work forward more, then we can discuss it then. I'm willing to drive on though. Like I said, this is a hill I'm willing to die on.
Very well. So that's table. We may circle back on that. Other items going down the list?
I do on canopy area.
Total.
We have
Triple R?
triple R. We have a definition on J of what a canopy is. So is a canopy area the sum of the canopy, each plant, and then added? Are we counting the spaces and the rows?
Yes, it's a perimeter around the canopy of all of the plants. So if you have a bunch of plants that are little dots, you draw a line around that,
Okay.
and be the outer rim of all of that.
I don't
including the
support
space
that.
between. Okay.
I did have a note on it, because you have canopy in J, and I just reading it at first, I was of the opinion that maybe we could strike this because it's incongruent with the definition is in J. So could you please elaborate on that?
Any reason we can't cut that?
So as Julie explained, that the canopy is basically the area covered by the individual plant. The total canopy area, which is how we measure the cultivation site, is that entire, so rather than having little circles, we measure each circle, and the space in between the plants don't count. This says everything that's within the boundaries of the total canopy area, including any space that you need to walk between the plants to trim or to harvest or whatever, that's included in the total canopy area. That's why it's defined in two different ways. Individual canopy would be that portion of the plants. The total canopy area is used in this ordinance is the perimeter of all of the plants together, including the space between the plants.
And in the regs, under the CDFA regs, under subsection F, there's a very long-winded and specific definition of canopy, which we've sort of tied ourselves to. You don't have to, but for the sake of ease of reference, that's what we did. Canopy means the designated area at a licensed premises, except nurseries and processors, that will contain mature plants at any point in time as follows. 1, canopy shall be calculated in square feet and measured using clearly identifiable boundaries of all areas that will contain mature plants at any point in time, including all of the spaces within the boundaries. Canopy may be non-contiguous, but each unique area included in the total canopy calculation shall be separated by an identifiable boundary that includes but is not limited to interior walls, shelves, greenhouse walls, hoop house walls, garden benches, hedgerows, fencing, garden beds, or garden plots. And 3, if mature plants are being cultivated using a shelving system, the surface area of each level shall be included in the total canopy calculation. So what we did throughout this ordinance is, when the state provided us with a definition, we generally, for ease of reference and ease of talking between licenses from the state and local permits, we just thought it would be easier to use the same terminology. But certainly, if the board wants to define canopy for permitting purposes separately, it can. It just might get confusing because what's licensed at the state level would wind up being potentially different than what's licensed at the local level.
So,
I agree with you on what you just brought up, 3 CCR 8000 for J on canopy. That's why I brought up the triple R on total canopy area, because it's incongruent with what you just read.
I think sometimes we refer to total canopy area as a way of saying all of the canopy on the site, even when it's not all contiguous in the same part of the premises. So I'd have to do a little bit more looking throughout the ordinance to see if there's actually a conflict, an actual conflict there.
so, Council, if you were allowed an acre and because of your terrain, you want to do 2, you split it up to 2 half acres, is the canopy area each section a canopy area or the whole?
You could divide, you can have, on your premises, at
Right.
least for the state, which again, we've incorporated, and please, Ethan, if you think I'm wrong on this, let me know. You can define a portion of your premises called the cultivation site where your plants are. And if that space involves some uphill from another and terraced beds, and you draw on your diagram a line that encompasses all of them, that can all be part of your cultivation area. And the canopy would be measured, including the space between, as I understand it.
Whoa.
Now, whether as I sit here, I don't know whether if there was a large distance between 2 raised beds, whether the state would count that distance as part of the cultivation or total canopy area. But I think that Mr. Mauer, for local purposes, we've talked about, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, if there was one defined area within the cultivation site that had a bunch of plants, we'd measure that area and then walk over, not include the space between actual beds, but there would be like 2 perimeters that we would then add the areas together rather than including the 50 yards between those 2 beds. I think that's how Mr. Mauer and Mr. Turner intended to treat canopy area, but I'll turn it over to them.
That sounds correct. I mean, and that comports with the definition she just read. Canopy is the area of plants, and you look at an area in a particular area, but if it's divided, as she said in the definition, and there's another set of canopy, then you would measure that one individually and measure this one individually, and that would be the total canopy area at the site. You wouldn't measure all the way around if say, they're divided by a building. Or a road. You would look at the 2 separate canopy areas individually, measure their total canopy, and that would be the total canopy area of the cultivation site.
So,
Would you explain like that, because my interpretation was a little bit different when I first read it, sir, but with that interpretation, I would concur, as long as that's clearly identified in here. Because I think there could be a better impact mitigation if people didn't have to continue putting rows going down the side of the hill in certain situations. If you had 2 separate flat spots, that could take care of some of the grading mitigations in the future.
As far as I understand it, as long as the cultivation site portion of the premises encompassed all of these different areas where the plants would be, we would be measuring a perimeter or diameter of each separate section within the cultivation site. That's how we would be doing our enforcement, as I understand it.
With that interpretation, I could roll with that. I just don't want people thinking that if they only have 5 feet between the plants, that they don't have to include that. It's got to be something significant.
But I think where the confusion arises, when the definition talks about including space between the plants, if you have a garden and you've decided to put in one defined area in your cultivation site 10 plants with 100 feet between them in that defined area, you're not going to draw a perimeter around each individual plant canopy. It's going to be a perimeter of the entire section that they're growing in, including the spaces between the individual plants that are in that section. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes better sense to me. If that's the way it's interpreted, and then on record, I'm good with it.
Supervisor
So
Callaway?
why couldn't you say, there's 10 rows, and they're each in their own bed, and then measure it that way? I have 10 plants in this row, 10 plants in this row, and 10 plants, and the circumference of each is X. And I do X times 10 times 5, and that's my canopy area. Are we making it easier for us, or are we making it more equitable for the cultivator? Some cultivators might have wide rows, some might have narrow rows.
We're trying to make it easier for
Us.
consistency approach to enforcement. So we can clearly articulate on, the site plan that's submitted to us as well as the state. This is the area. We're trying to be consistent with state law, but making it clear that the way we measure it includes the space in between. So if you have, several beds with maybe 3 to 5 feet in between, that 3 to 5 feet in between counts as part of the canopy area. The plants are going to grow bigger over time, so it's easier that way for everyone.
Okay.
Supervisor Mills, you had a question?
Yeah, I'd like to go to Q, page
Okay,
4.
Let me wrap up.
Oh, on
R,
this one?
triple R.
Thank you. That's fine.
Mr. Stopper, did you want to withdraw your change?
Well, it's Marita's.
It's Rita's change.
I just, I'm going to read into it a little bit more tonight and reserve the ability till later.
Okay. Supervisor Callaway, you good with that? Or do you wanna-
I just want to get one more clarification, council, after the two councils finish chit-chatting. How close is this then to what the state is saying? I guess that I
We're
will,
trying to make it the same. So there's going to be
Okay.
a premises diagram that has to be submitted
Right.
to the state. That premises diagram will have the outside of the whole premises, then it will have a cultivation site. The cultivation site will also have to point out in the diagram what sections of the cultivation site are
Okay.
going to contain plants. We don't know of anybody who's actually submitting a diagram to the state where each individual plant is drawn. And
Okay.
so we're hoping to do.
I just want to make
the same
sure
thing
we are, at
there.
least, we are with where the state is. That's
That's
not
certainly our
making.
intention.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on from triple R. Supervisor Mills, you had something?
Yes, on Q and the word co-location, trying to define it. I spent some time looking in state code and in federal code as to whether or not there's a definition for this term, and I only found it as a French term. It is most likely used in joint use of medical care facilities and the telecommunications industry. So then I had to think about this in terms of real estate law and what type of limitation are we going to provide here. Where multiple leases on a single property are using a common water supply, they would have a common septic system, common use of gas or electricity, common harvest of crops, or jointly engaging in workers, or even a common distribution of harvested crops. All of that falls into real estate or investment contract relationships. I would like to see if the board is willing to insert with a co-location that the words after single parcel does not result in an investment contract relationship. Because you're going to fall into a securities issue if you don't clearly spell that out. I might be over people's heads, but it's very important that this not be an investment contract.
Is there any interest in the board, or do you have any, I don't see any reason, I wouldn't do this, why there would be any reason, legal reason not, but who wants to take this on?
I personally, if people are going to go into a joint venture and they're going to co-locate, their responsibility rides with them on their contract. It's not up to the county to micromanage each and every business to that thing. We're in the business of enforcement to land and use regulations, not real estate business regulations.
Supervisor Toffenali?
I understand both sides of the issue. I'm fine with it the way it is.
Supervisor Callaway?
Fine the way it is.
How many find the way it is? Other items under the definitions? Under 020.
I have one.
Supervisor Toffenali?
Under triple L, security fencing. And I know the fencing is talked about later on. But here it spells out the specific height of 6 feet. And a lot of times when we had the urgency ordinance going and there were grows going and there was fencing up at 6 feet, the plants were growing over it. The specific one was on Highway 26 when it's a small acre parcel there. And he had a fence around it, yes, and you could see the cannabis growing over the top of it. So I would like to see at least a 7-foot fence around it. I don't know if that's what.
Is there any reason we can't consider that? It's our discretion, right? All right.
It may be that over 6 feet triggers a permit requirement, and I'm not sure about that. But
That is correct.
And we've got the building official.
yeah,
It requires a permit.
It requires a permit? Over 6 feet is a permit?
7 feet under the recently adopted code.
Okay. So this change would require a permit. Supervisor Stopper?
No.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
Supervisor Callaway?
No.
Supervisor Garabedian, no. Okay. Next item. Anybody else have anything on 020?
Chair, from the DA's office, can I just, on a specific definition?
In the DA's office, yes.
Yes. R, the definition of commercial. The first part, is referring to the activities under the new state regulations. The second definition of commercial refers to collective and cooperative cannabis cultivation. And it's my understanding that those terms, which are nowhere else, I believe, defined, are kind of referring to some past practices under the Medical Marijuana Act, SB 420, things like that. And I'm just wondering if this kind of dual definition is going to cause some problems with clarity of what we're really referring to.
I can speak a little to this. I agree that this is antiquated. When I looked at the deadline under Mount Cursa for people to, before that defense completely goes away, it was later than now. And so I wanted to make sure that we're capturing them as, they can't say they don't need a permit because they're collective, a collective or a cooperative. And because of the timing, I decided to keep that in. But if you don't think it's more of a criminal issue, I just thought it would be helpful, given that there's apparently still that defense under Mount Cursa.
So, and that deadline is clearly established?
There was a deadline before they had to be completely waived, removed. And I don't, off the top of my head, it was within months or a year before that was completely phased out. I don't, as I speak here, if I had known in advance, I would have been able to answer your question.
I think it's this November, actually. It's coming up very soon, I believe.
It's coming up soon? Okay. I mean, we could get rid of it if it would help you.
The implication is that it allows activities under that umbrella of commercial that I don't think the intent of the rest of the regulation is really intending. So,
I guess my intention drafting it was that you can't, if you're doing something that if you're calling it collective or cooperative, we're counting you as commercial, yes, you need a permit. That was my intent. If you have suggestions to make that stronger or better, feel free.
Mr. Stone, do you have a suggestion?
can we table it a little bit? Now that I understand a little bit behind the purpose.
Okay.
I would have just one, until such time as it ends, provide.
Yeah, we need something in there that really kind of captures that at a certain point in time, this is going to end and this is no longer.
Ultimately, depending on when this ordinance, if it does get approved, we have so many days before it becomes reality. Is that post the date that this sunsets anyways? So would it even be an issue? And should we strike it?
I mean, again, this was mostly just to try to get rid of a potential loophole that I saw during this short period of time we have before that defense comes to mind. I'd be perfectly happy to listen to Mr. Stone's recommended language change to make him more comfortable. I mean, it's certainly your call, but this was trying to ensure that they don't claim that they're not commercial and therefore say that they don't need a permit because of the Compassionate Use Act.
Can we do this? Can you work with Mr. Stone, make sure we're solid with the DAs and wrap that up? We are going to be talking about this tomorrow.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a massive change. We're talking about adding or subtracting a sentence.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Okay, anything else on 020? All right, making progress. We are on 1795030, relationship to other local and state laws. Mr. Mauer, do you want to say anything about this before we dig in? Was there any errata?
No.
Okay. Who would like to begin? Mr. Mills, your light was on, or you? Oh, Mr. Stopper, or Ms. Calloway, your light was on before Mr. Stopper's. Stopper, you leave, sorry.
On A, how does this apply to dispensaries?
How does it apply to dispensaries?
Yeah, I mean, we have a dispensary ordinance. Are we saying this trumps that?
No, it does
Well,
not. We will be bringing back a revision to 1791, which is the dispensary ordinance, to bring that into compliance with state law, as well as the direction of the board to allow for adult use sales. There are some interplay between these two where we talk about cultivation and the fact that our current ordinance allows cultivation within a dispensary for the dispensary clients.
Okay.
So what we're saying is that if there is a conflict here in A, this regulation will supersede that other, but we've tried to write it so that we don't create a conflict.
Okay, thank you.
Stopper?
B. I have a few things on B.
Okay.
Let's start with the first sentence. For the purpose of informing the state, I would like to introduce after state in all applicable state agencies, because with the permitting process, we have the Water Board, the CDFA, Fish and Wildlife, for example, that a licensure applicant and its associated premise are eligible. Yeah, that's where I would like to insert that. If you don't need me to read the whole thing, I can, but.
The purpose of this was because in order to apply for licensure, we were of the understanding that growers needed to receive a letter of conditional authorization, and that letter was specifically to be addressed to the state, and that's what allows the state to know that they are apparently or appear to be eligible for the program. So we were drafting this specifically to a state licensing board requirement. So that I have not seen a legal requirement that we also provide notification to the water board, or else there will be some licensure consequence.
And Peter may recall this more than me, but I believe that people did lose their water board permits when they no longer had local authorization. And
As a matter of course, we communicated closely with the various state agencies while we were under the provisions of the urgency ordinance. And we called or texted or emailed almost on a daily basis as far as confirming that certain permits were issued. In this case, we are relying on the state license for cultivation, the Department of Food and Agriculture, and they are responsible for ensuring that any other applicable state license or state permit is issued before they issue the license to cultivate. I think by saying the state, it means any and all agencies of the state without naming specific ones. So I'm not sure if the additional suggestion is necessary. It may be helpful. I'm just concerned if we,
So
state changes
the way you
its
understand this and the intent of it is those agencies are included with the state, because it doesn't say it explicitly, but the state would be all state agencies.
Right. And I'd be concerned
Okay.
if we identify a specific agency and then the state changes its rules, or we're going to have this agency do it instead, or there's some new provision that another agency gets involved, and we don't have that. I think by keeping it more general, we have a broader scope, broader reach to ensure that we're communicating with them.
Supervisor Conley, you have a thought on that?
I just wanted to move to another part of B.
If we could, let's deal with this one that's on the front. So Supervisor Stopper, do you want to carry that on? Do you want us to put that in, or do you want us to?
Well, I do have a question on it.
Yes, sir.
It says it will shall be issued by the county designated department, a letter of conditional authorization. Are you issuing that to the applicant so he can put that in his application to the state, or are you issuing it to the state? How is this working? Because if you're issuing it to the applicant so he can put it in his application to the state, he can make copies to the water board, to whoever that would ask for one or needs one. So I want to know what you're talking about when you say shall be issued.
It would be issued to the applicant.
To the applicant,
Yes.
so he could
And
make
it's
copies.
his responsibility to make sure it gets to whatever state agency.
Whatever agencies that he needs to do.
Mr. Turner, your light's on. Did you want to add
Oh,
something?
yeah, I was just going to point out that the state actually will check with us, too. I mean, before, and I actually spoke to an attorney for CDFA last week, and when they receive an application from a person within our jurisdiction, they will send Mr. Mauer or the designated individual a email to find out whether or not there is local authorization. And we have to respond with there's 3 check boxes. We can say yes, pending, or no.
Let's make a clear statement there that letter would be issued to the applicant, so that there is no question on the part of anybody as to where is that letter going.
So there's actually 2 parts of this section. One is the initial sort of indication that they meet our criteria and that they need to take that to the state. Then the last sentence actually requires the county to contact the state agency if we revoke or they're no longer eligible.
No, that's
And that
fine.
would definitely, we would want to inform the state directly.
I'm fine with that. I just feel that everybody needs to be aware, who are we going to give that letter to?
With the state requirements, all anybody has to do is qualify under zoning. laws, the way I understand it. So wouldn't it streamline the process for a blanket letter to go out, that people that qualify go out, so that you don't have to produce so many letters each and every time? Wouldn't that cut down on your workload?
Well, each application is going to be individual. We won't know that all of them are going to qualify. We'll be doing site inspections, we'll be analyzing all the information they provide, and in some cases, they may not get approved, they may not pass the background check. Right now, the process that we've envisioned is an application is filed with the county, we review it, we either approve it or disapprove it. We then provide that letter to the applicant, which he can then take to the state to file his application. There has been some suggestion that we issue some type of letter to the applicant or to the state that says this individual has applied and is eligible to apply, so that it can be concurrent processing for the state with the state application. That's not the way it's written right now, but that's something that's a policy call that you could make.
That's why I was discussing it the way it was.
So if we want to have it consecutively, the applicant would need to wait until we tentatively approve the permit, subject to finalization of state licensing and any other things that we might, the payment of rim fee, for example, or whatever else might be for the final validation of that permit. Just as we do with a conditional use permit, for example. We issue the permit, you've got a certain period of time to comply with all the conditions, and then we validate that permit. That's what we're looking at as far as this type of permit as well. But if there's a desire to allow for concurrent processing, we would need to maybe modify the language slightly that allows for us to issue some statement that says they've applied, there's an initial review that they at least meet the minimum parcel size and zoning requirement, so they can then file their application with the state.
Let's keep our policy consistent.
I don't understand what you're saying by consistent.
The way we do it currently right now in land use should be the same way we do it with this.
That's entirely different. That's totally internal to the county.
Okay.
I would like to do something where we can do it concurrently, because the state process is also a long process, because of probably the volumes of requests they have throughout the state of California, that if we can do something concurrently, doesn't mean they get it, but it's just that they've applied, they've met the minimum requirements that Mr. Mauer discussed, and then they can go to the state and they can apply to the state and take a ticket and wait their turn with the state while we continue to do our processing and evaluation, because they can't get a state license without confirmation of a permanent, with a permit from the county, but the process can go without it, waiting for the county, which could be several weeks. So I would like to see something that's a concurrent process, that there's a letter of intent.
Mr. Mauer, the way it's currently written, this allows for a concurrent process, correct?
Yes.
How does it allow?
So what we're saying is we need to make sure that they meet all the provisions of 050D except for 5, 9, and 10. So we need to go back, so look through all the provisions of 050D, and they meet the basic criteria. They meet the zoning criteria, they meet the minimum parcel size criteria, the authorization from landowner. So the ones that are not required concurrently before we issue that would be, again, 5, 9, and 10. 5 is that they've cleared all of the background check procedure. We still wouldn't allow them to cultivate until they did that, but that would be one of the final steps.
Well, the state law wouldn't allow them until you wouldn't provide them a provisional until you provided a permit regardless, right? So that gives the opportunity for concurrent.
I mean, we sort of have a chicken and egg problem here with the state license and the local permit, which comes first. And the state says you need to have something from the county, a permit from the county. But we want to make sure that they actually qualify with the state before we allow them to start cultivating. So we want to make sure that all the i's are dotted and all the t's are crossed. They comply with both all the state requirements as well as the county requirements before any plant goes in the ground. And that was the biggest
That's when the
problem we
actual
had with
permit
the
gets issued.
ordinance, was plants were in the ground before anyone had a chance to review it. So, you know, so 9 and 10, obviously, they need the license from the state is 9, and 10 would be, they need a business license, which they wouldn't get till the very end when it's all authorized. So everything else they would have to comply with. So it's like a preliminary check. Yes, you meet all these criteria. Now we can issue that, that permit, or at least that notification to the state that this person is eligible to apply. We'll be continuing our review to ensure that, you know, the site plan conforms with what's actually on the ground, all those other things that would be necessary before we issue the validated permit.
But we're going to turn something over to the state where no background check's been completed, basically.
Well, they're going to do their
Section
own
5.
background check.
Yeah, but I'm just simply saying it'll go that way.
Yeah.
Right, but no permit would be issued until someone passes it. So that would exclude 11 also, sir. For instance.
It creates a conflict. There's a conflict there.
So we would need to add 11 into excluding 8, 9, 10, and 11.
Well, I think that's a policy call. Do you want us to go ahead and notify, allow them to apply with the state before they pass the background check? Or do you want the background check to be something that is qualifying at the, you know?
We had this discussion during the study session, and from what I recall, it was if an applicant, because of this very reason on the letter of notification going out or of intent, that we, you know, if someone were to go and file with the state and pay all their fees and then later come back and it ends up that they didn't qualify for one reason or another, that's their bad. They paid for state licensure and went through all the steps, and when they knowingly wouldn't have qualified if they knew they'd done a crime before. So that's my thought behind it.
Let me, I'm going to try to bring this back here.
We're kind of running all over.
Yeah. Okay, Supervisor Stopper, you suggested adding after, in the first sentence, after informing the state and all applicable state agencies. Do you want to continue that, or are you okay? You want me to pull for that change?
Instead of the state, all applicable state agencies, just put it, I would go for all applicable state agencies.
Informing.
And that goes hand in hand. I mean, it doesn't prevent or facilitate anything more than what you just had suggested.
So the suggestion is, the sentence would read, for the purpose of informing all applicable state agencies that a licensure applicant and his or her, is that correct, on that first line?
Yes.
And that's what you'd like to pull on? Okay. Supervisor Toffenelli?
Sure.
Supervisor Mills?
No.
Supervisor Callaway?
No.
Supervisor Garamendi, yes. 3-2.
That's the first time we've had a vote
Huh?
like that.
To do what?
The sentence will read, for the purpose of informing all applicable state agencies.
Yeah,
Is that a
keep track.
licensure?
I have more here, but Marita was talking about something else earlier, and then so was Dennis. Are we going to go through those
We are
also?
still on letter B. Maria,
Right.
do you want to add anything to letter B before Supervisor
Well,
Stop takes another bite?
I thought I'm hearing two different things from Mr. I'm hearing two different things from Mr. Mauer. If what I was looking for was that they apply and you do initial drive-by, the zoning's correct and so forth. Then they be issued a letter of intent so they could start the process with the state. And then we then proceed with what it is we're going to be requiring and doing and so forth. And as Mr. Stopper said, they can pay all this money to the state and we deny them. That's on the cultivator, that's not on the county. But then I thought I heard you say that's what this is saying. And
So
that's,
I may have not been very clear. So with the exceptions of sections 5, 9, and 10 of 050D, and someone suggested that we add 11 to it, they would need to we would need to verify they comply with all the other provisions before we would send that letter. And most of it is simply concurrence with the zoning, the minimum parcel size, landowner authorization, those kinds of things. It's not a lengthy process. Now, 11 also includes all code compliance issues. So do they have any unpermitted structures on the site? Are there other code violations that need to be corrected?
Right, and maybe there needs to be a separation there later so that we can make, because the code compliance issues need to stay in there explicitly. I mean, if someone hasn't remediated those with the last site, then that's something we've talked about all along. So I concur with you on that. Maybe a separation of 11, making it 11 and 12, and separating 9.22 from the code compliance issues.
Which gets the background check conflict out of it.
Exactly.
Mr. Mauer, unless I'm reading 5 differently, is 5 the badge?
Dennis
They
did.
have to have the badge?
Dennis did bring up a good point. We already addressed 9.22 and number 5 of that. So, you know, and so we could add 5 to the list and strike the 9.22 thing in number 11.
Yeah, I think that was in there to ensure that they also made sure the workers have badges as well. But again,
Majority of the time, the workers aren't going to be working until after a permit's
yeah,
issued,
it's when we do a
regardless.
transfer. It's when we do a transfer.
Yeah.
All right.
So number 5 is specific to the badge. Number 11 is more general to all code compliance issues.
Okay, so Supervisor Stopper, what is your suggestion? Or Marita, what is your suggestion?
Well, if what I'm hearing you say is that if they go through and there's the very preliminary, they pay us the fee, we give them a letter of intent so they can start the process with the state, I don't see why we're talking about they don't have to do 5, 9, and 10 to get the letter. Are you saying we include 5, 9, and 10 as omitted, and everything else they have to do before they get a letter of
The other
intent?
13 of the 16 provisions under D, 050D, would have to be verified before we would issue that letter.
But those things don't take very long. They just require Peter to look at the application in-house. He doesn't have to wait for another process to take place. So it's showing that the site and the person, it appears that if they pass background and get their state license and what have you, that they're likely to get a permit. That's what this says.
But the rub is that we're including workers in number 11, D11. I know we're kind of ahead of ourselves here, Chair.
You could remove chapter 922 from number 11. since we
That's what I was saying.
already
A
have it.
simpler way to do it is simply just strike it from, and it's a different section. We're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves.
But it all ties in together, and there's a couple conflicts throughout here that I'll bring up later that I have marked out, and this is all part of properly drafting an ordinance is making sure that it fluidly runs throughout it. So this conversation needs to be had. May I make a suggestion that we come back to this one a little bit more tomorrow? Because I would like to read this and take it in a little bit more, just to make sure that I have a full understanding. If you're all right with that, I don't know. Hold the board on it. I mean, we're working on it unless you have more suggestions, Rita.
Okay. Is there a change, so nobody's making this a suggested change to be at this point?
No.
Other than what we've already polled on? Supervisor Toffenali?
No,
No.
I'm good with what it says.
Okay.
With the change that he wanted before, I'm fine with it.
Do you want to bring it back up tomorrow?
No.
Supervisor Mills?
No. I'm fine
Supervisor
too.
Callaway?
Yes.
We'll talk about it again tomorrow.
I think we need to make sure it's fluid.
We will continue discussion about B after everybody does a little more research this evening. We'll lead off with these that we're going back on. We'll start off at the top, see if anybody's changed their mind, so we could continue scooching along through the document. Okay. Nothing more on B. We're moving down as we move to the rest of 030. Are there other items or questions?
On which one?
We are still on 030. We have completed B, so anything on C, D, E, or F?
I do on D. The state says that cannabis cultivation is an ag. We are saying it's not ag. Yet there's so many times we seem to hit roadblocks in this ordinance where it conflicts with what we do with agriculture. And let me give an example. If you're building a drying barn or whatever, you have to build it to commercial standards. Yet these buildings are not open to the public. We do not have tasting rooms or smoking rooms or whatever on these sites. So why not allow these facilities to be built to what we would do with an ag? So I think this should be, if we want to be as close to the state as possible, we can say this is an ag product, but it's not with the exclusion without the right to farm, because our ag ordinance deals with the right to farm. We can say this can be without the right to farm.
Mr. Maurer?
So the way this language is written, it specifically refers to Title 14, which is the right to farm, has the right to farm provision in it. It doesn't refer to Title 15, which is the building code, so that we would apply the appropriate code for building purposes depending on the use, which is the same way we've been handling it for the past 3 years while it was legal.
If I may, also, the building director is here, so if there is a significance to the categorizing a structure as being for agricultural use, he could explain that to you. It's my understanding, however, that under Title 24, an agricultural building to be exempt from permits is just for the storage of grain or farming equipment. And once you have a human being working in there, it's no longer agricultural occupancy, and it's subject to all the other building code requirements. And Doug Oliver is here if you want to have clarification on that topic.
So we have an ag barn with hay or whatever in it, and we don't have anybody working in the barn? Mr. Oliver?
The classification is based on the use in any agricultural endeavor. So if you are processing, you could be classified as a factory use. If you are storage, it would be a agricultural storage use. There's specific size limitations and fire safety regulations that apply to whatever use you place inside of an agricultural building. I'm not aware of any county ordinance that specifically exempts structures that are agricultural from permits. Generally, you're looking at a 120 square foot max on an exempt structure. There are some size limitations that are bumped out significantly for agriculture. 1,000 square foot for residential miscellaneous use as opposed to 12,000 for agricultural. So your miscellaneous uses can get a lot larger because of the reduced fire hazard. But overall, we are going to classify each structure regardless of lot based on its actual use and occupancy.
So you treat a barn where they store hay or whatever, and I'm going to build a barn, as the same conditions as any commercial building?
No, we would classify any building regardless of storage, commercial or agricultural, based on the type of storage. So if you're storing a bunch of hay, that's a flammable component. If you're storing it as a commercial business to ship it to an agricultural use, we would still call it a storage use as opposed to
A storage
a
use,
business
commercial?
use, let's say.
I understand it, but if we said that cannabis is an ag product without the right to farm, which is what do we treat that differently than a hay barn where I have hay that I ship out to other ranchers or farmers or what have you?
If I understand you correctly, we're not going to treat that structure any differently.
So it'll be treated the same as a commercial building, a commercial structure.
If I understand you correctly, what I'm saying, what you're looking for is, are we going to treat them differently? Because the classification is going to be based on the use. But if you're saying it's right to farm versus not right to farm, that has no bearing on how we classify the structure. So they would be treated the same, whether it is a business or a private use. It's what you put in the building that matters. I don't know if I'm answering this.
No, you might be, I just might not be
Okay.
absorbing what you're saying. Because I think we should follow state law and say that this is an agricultural operation, not that it's not an ag. And then because of the sensitivity of right to farm, the sensitivity that all the people spoke about today, I understand that. So we could say it's an ag operation without the right to farm.
May I interject?
I don't
real
know,
quick?
it depends
There's-
on what you say.
There's two reasons why I would propose, I need county council to probably check on what I'm saying, but first of all, if we make it an ag use, then it doesn't coincide with Measure C, and we wouldn't be able to collect the taxes as it's written. If we didn't, because the way it's written on commercial cultivation, but I'm not totally sure, but they would have to read into that, for one. Number two, the one change that would have to do with making it ag would be a mitigation measure required by our EIR, and that would be grading. There would be no need for a grading permit on an ag use. So at that point, the way the codes are written in the county, and I think that would create a greater change environmentally if we went down that route, because grading permits help mitigate the environmental impact. Do you concur, sir, ma'am? Sorry, apologize.
As far as Measure C, designating it an agricultural commodity, I don't think I haven't looked at this, but I would assume an agricultural commodity would still fall within commercial for Measure C purposes. We can certainly look into that and report back tomorrow. You are correct, under Title 15, we do have exemptions to the grading permit for agricultural operations. So to the extent that you would want to designate it an agricultural commodity, I would suggest that you clearly identify that the exemption under Title 15 does not apply to cannabis.
So we would recommend at that point that we add 15, where it says, for the purposes of Title 14 and Title 15 of the Calaveras County Code. Because otherwise it would potentially exempt it from the grading ordinance provisions.
I guess I'm asking for a poll of the board just to leave it the way it is for right now.
Supervisor Callaway, you had the floor.
Oh, thank you.
And then
Oh,
we'll
I'm,
go to you next, Supervisor Mills.
I'd like to make it an ag product in keeping with state law. I'm excluding Title 15 and 14 as recommended. It does not apply, as is the right to farm.
And that's essentially what this provision says. For the purposes of right to farm, if we add 15, it would also be the grading ordinance, that this is not considered an agricultural operation for those specific purposes. As far as the rest of the way the state addresses it, it's an ag product. There's probably many other reasons why it's considered agricultural for, building code purposes. In some cases, if, it's just storage of materials or equipment, it would still fall into the ag provision. But what we wanted to make sure was that someone didn't try to circumvent the provision by claiming that, oh, I'm ag, so therefore I don't have to apply for a grading permit, or I'm going to call myself a rural home business that has other provisions in Title 17.
And just to clarify, we keep saying the state says it's ag. The state says it's ag, and then in quotes, for purposes of this division being the cannabis division. So it's not set in stone, or I'm not aware of any preemption issue that would require us to deem it ag for all purposes. The state doesn't require itself to deem it ag for all purposes under that language.
So Supervisor Callaway, would you like me to poll the board on adding those comments?
I think I've been duly corrected.
So, no?
No.
Okay. Supervisor Mills, I think that takes care of your question.
It does.
Is there consensus to add the reference to Title 15 as well?
No.
Here.
You want a poll on that, adding Title 15?
Is there, one more time, Peter, I'm sorry.
So I think we overlooked adding the reference to Title 15 here because we want to make sure that it's not considered an agricultural operation for the purposes of Title 15, where 1505-080I, which is a list of exemptions, identifies grading related to or in support of an agricultural operation is exempt from the grading ordinance.
So by adding Title 15, you're saying it cannot get an exemption from grading. That's what adding Title 15 does. It precludes them from getting an exemption from the otherwise required grading requirements.
Okay.
It's interesting that no one had thought about that before.
Well, I think we just forgot to put in the Title 15.
I mean, just
Well,
considering,
it's certainly our intent to, we want to make sure that grading permits, we saw a lot of grading occurring with the previous round.
And it's something that's addressed within the EIR that is a mitigation measure. So I would definitely be in favor of adding Title 15 to that, just for that very reason.
Okay, let me poll real quick. Supervisor Mills?
yes.
Supervisor Kaufman?
Yes.
Supervisor Callaway? Yes. Supervisor Garamendi, yes. Please add 15. Okay, on 030, anybody have anything on E or F? Nothing on E or F. All right, we've got 10 minutes, and I'm going to pull the plug at 5 o'clock. We'll start again in the morning. But let's see if we can't get 040 done. Nuisance declared. Cannabis cultivation and commercial cannabis activities prohibited. Mr. Maurer, anything you want to say about this one?
Nope.
Board members? Okay. So that stays. All right. 050 is going to take a long time, though.
I cut it right here.
I think this is a good time to cut it. We will resume this meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I want to remind everybody, this is a continuation of the meeting in the morning, so we will not start with public comment. We will continue the meeting as if we had started right from this moment. Thank you.